Good evening, everybody. First of all, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. My name is Cliff Brown, and I am the chair of the advisory committee's ad hoc subcommittee that is hearing Article 19, resolution to support an enduring bilateral ceasefire, allowing humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, return of all hostages, and a lasting peace. Before we begin, I have several comments to make, some of which relate to how this evening's activities will proceed, some of which will answer some questions that have been asked by many people, including speakers and those who have submitted written comments, and finally, a statement to the community. The other members of the subcommittee are John Doggett, who is home with COVID, Kelly Hardebeck, Danelle O'Neill, and Jocelyn Murphy. I want to thank the petitioners and all those who have proposed amendments for their courteous cooperation and communication over the past several weeks. And the same goes for all the individuals who have signed up to speak this evening. This will be a long night. We have more than 50 speakers, including the petitioners. If everyone uses their entire time allotment, we will be listening to about 2.5 hours of comments and presentations. For speakers from the public, your 2-minute time slot will be strictly adhered to, and we apologize in advance, but we will cut you off or mute you if you exceed your allotted time. If you think you have little to add after listening to others, please consider not speaking. Also, your comments should be focused on the article and the proposed amendments. Please do not comment on or criticize anything someone else has said, or your time will be cut short. People who have signed up to speak may make statements or cite statistics that you do not agree with. Please keep any reactions to anything anyone else says to yourself. We are prepared to ask people to leave the room if this basic courtesy is not provided to each and every speaker. And we're prepared to abruptly adjourn the meeting if we feel emotions have reached an uncomfortable level. We considered but decided to not obtain a police presence this evening, and we look forward to not having to call them for assistance. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. There have been many people who have asked questions like, why is town meeting considering something like this? Why is something like this on the warrant? Why is the advisory committee involved at all? Does the advisory committee have to make recommendations? And other questions of that nature. I view them all as ones related to process and the law. So for everyone's benefit, I'm going to take a few minutes, hopefully not minutes, and provide some basic information. Former town council Ms. Murphy will correct me if I misstate any facts, I'm sure. State law says that the selectmen shall insert in the warrant for the annual town meeting all subjects, the insertion of which shall be requested of them in writing by 10 or more registered voters of the town. State law also says that advisory or finance committees shall consider any or all municipal questions for the purpose of making reports or recommendations to the town. Our own bylaw says the advisory committee shall consider any and all municipal questions, including appropriation requests and proposed action under all articles in the warrant for a town meeting for the purpose of making reports and recommendations to the town. In short, after obtaining at least 10 signatures of registered voters, the petitioners had the legal right to file their article and have it placed in the warrant. The advisory committee is legally obligated to consider the article and the duly filed proposed amendments and to write a report for town meeting's consideration. And town meeting is legally obligated to hear the article and proposed amendments and to vote on them. The advisory committee has in the past offered no recommendation on certain articles. And finally, before we begin, I want to acknowledge the fact that this hearing is occurring before sundown during the month of Ramadan, when Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset. Our Muslim neighbors have also break their fast after sundown, often with a communal dinner, and also perform obligatory prayers. Because of the timing of the hearing, many Muslims will be unable to attend this evening or will have to miss some of the hearing. I want to publicly apologize to the Muslim community for the scheduling mistake and to thank them for agreeing to not request a postponement of tonight's activities. Having now spoken far more than I'm comfortable doing, I would like to turn to the petitioners of Article 19 for their 10-minute presentation. Thank you.
This computer up.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So thanks to the advisory committee. My name is Omar Mabrouk. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 5. I'm also a co-petitioner on Warrant Article 19. First off, I do want to acknowledge the discomfort and even hurt that this debate has caused some in our community. We know that Israel and Palestine are so deeply personal to many of us. The intent was not to cause division, but to call Brookline to action. This community is strong and we will get past this tragic moment in history, but how we move forward matters, and how we deal with this will be scrutinized by future generations. Since our select board hearing in March, we've been busy listening to the community. We heard many who want the war to end in principle, but didn't quite agree with all the language in the original resolution. Amended Warrant Article 19 is stronger because it incorporates these different perspectives and community feedback to focus on the key objectives. It calls for a bilateral ceasefire, meaning both sides stop fighting. It doesn't mean Israel surrenders and Hamas regroups to continue fighting, shooting rockets into Israel. It factually states that Hamas committed a terrorist attack on October 7th that precipitated this war. A war that has resulted in a catastrophic man-made humanitarian disaster. And finally, our amendment demands the safe return of all remaining hostages. I think it's fair to say most of us can agree on these points. So Article 19 is a plea to our community, to our state, to our country, that this war must stop to prevent worsening of this crisis. Today, children are starving to death in Gaza. Today, delivering humanitarian aid in a war zone has had deadly consequences, and the killing of the World Central Kitchen staff has made other humanitarian organizations rethink their plans to deliver the aid because of safety concerns. So we're calling for an immediate end to this cycle of violence so that humanitarian aid can get to those who need it urgently. It simply can't wait for Netanyahu's endgame, which is not linked to any real long-term solutions. It cannot wait. Although there are 4 options on the table today, the petitioner's amendment and then the 3 other amendments, the subcommittee really has 2 choices. Ours and the Levy amendment both call for a ceasefire on humanitarian grounds, while the other 2 very intentionally do not call for a ceasefire. Not supporting a ceasefire effectively endorses this war and the Netanyahu strategy, which has destroyed Gaza's civilian infrastructure and has seen the use of food as a weapon. And this has been shown by Human Rights Watch, Oxfam, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, among others. Look, Israelis absolutely have a right to live in peace and security, but so do Palestinians. How does the starvation and the killing of tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians make Israel more safe? The answer is that it does not. It actually has the opposite unintended consequence. Animosity will continue to grow the more that this goes on, and the more suffering that continues here. And the generation of orphans created by this war are now going to struggle to overcome grief for years. But we need the healing to start now. So let's talk about the amendments that are not calling for a ceasefire. The Soyer-Shatz amendment offers a strong condemnation of Hamas, but not much else. The Gladstone Amendment calls on Brookline to support the Biden administration's efforts to secure lasting peace. And on the surface, this sounds like a sensible approach, but here's why it falls massively short. Our administration has been painfully slow to react and hasn't provided the necessary leadership to guide this conflict towards resolution. But the real elephant in the room here is that this administration continuously provides the weapons that are being used for the devastation that we're all here talking about today. The day that the 7 World Central Kitchen staff were killed by American missiles, the State Department approved the transfer of 1,000 Mk-82 500-pound bombs and 1,000 small diameter bombs to Israel. So how is support for this policy threading the needle? So it's true that the language from the administration has begun to shift with recent abstention in a temporary UN ceasefire resolution. And Biden himself has threatened to condition aid to Israel if they don't allow more aid to get into Gaza. But this has not stopped the bloodshed or the starvation. And Americans are demanding an immediate end to all of this. A Gallup poll from 2 weeks ago showed that 55% of the American public and 75% of Democratic voters do not support Israel's military action in Gaza. And this was before the killing of the World Central Kitchen staff. So I'm sure that these numbers are higher at this point. So calling for a ceasefire is not a fringe position. More than 100 municipalities in the United States have called for a ceasefire. Locally, we've seen resolutions passed in Cambridge, Somerville, Melrose, Medford, and they're being considered in Newton and Wellesley and other municipalities. So let Brookline join the global chorus of demonstrators, humanitarians, and people of conscience demanding an end to this war. Please vote favorable action on the Petitioners Amendment to Warrant Article 19. Thank you.
I want to make sure I'm in time. So my name is Naveen. Good evening, everyone. I've been a Brookline resident for over 14 years now, and I'm the lead petitioner on Warrant Article 19 and the subsequent amendment. I'd like to thank you all for giving me the time and the rest of the group today. So in my segment, I'd like to focus on the local front. Our amendment continues to focus on what it means for Brookline specifically. And we're appalled by the spike in hatred that we've seen since the start of the war and acknowledge the need for communication and healing in Brookline specifically, whether it be anti-Palestinian vandalism in a park, anti-Zionist graffiti on the Longwood T, othering behaviors in our schools, to threatening posts on the Facebook town page. All this hatred just needs to come to an end. And let's be clear, these incidents are happening because of the tragic war and not because our warrant article is being submitted. We need to bring opposing views to light and not get defensive and say, you know, the town government isn't the venue to have this discussion. And I'm glad, Cliff, you walked us through a little bit more of that. But saying that would be sweeping the serious issue just under the rug. And we need to be honest with ourselves and focus on our collective humanity here and help our community be brave and face this head on. Town meeting is, in fact, a place for our town and to safely and courageously discuss difficult matters important to our community. And clearly this topic is important to many of us, just considering how many speakers and how many people are in this room today. Local politics are the foundation of our democracy, and Brookline Town Meeting has a rich history of discussing tough issues, including foreign policy. And a few of the many examples of resolutions we've passed in the town over decades, including 1970, Warrant Article 44, relevant to the Vietnam War, returning the troops. 81, Article 18, stopping the arms race with the Soviet Union. 2002, Warrant Article 1, opposing a U.S. attack in Iraq. 2012, Article 16, ending the war in Afghanistan. 2013, Warrant Article 17, opposing U.S. attack on Syria. And finally, as recently as 2022, the town meeting passed a resolution calling for an end to the Cuba embargo. So we share this with you today to provide some historical context to the subcommittee. So no matter how many times we hear the town does not get involved, it's simply an inaccurate statement of what's actually been happening in our town. And I ask you, if Brookline Town Meeting is not the place to discuss something that affects so many of us personally, then where should our diverse views be expressed and how should we spark conversation alignment around protecting our community and humanity when these atrocities are being committed? So let's have this discussion and let's begin healing. Thank you all for the time.
Thank you. You see my up?
Yes, no, I just, let me reset the clock.
Okay.
Just give us a second, Scott.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Great. I'm Scott Gladstone. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Michael Burstein is watching by Zoom as he tends to his children. We are asking you to support the Gladstone-Burstein amendment, which has been ruled within scope by the moderator. You've already seen in writing, you will see from the comments that follow mine, that Article 19 is stirring passions in town and not in a positive way. In the schools, between and among students, staff, and faculty, as well as in the town as a whole, people are conflicted. The school administrators continue to try to figure out how best to change the atmosphere for the better, but they are struggling. The original resolution under Article 19 was not going to help that. It was not going to bring people together. That was on full display at and leading up to the select board hearing. The original resolution missed the mark, was not balanced, and contained conclusory, unsupported statements while also suffering from glaring omissions. The Levy amendment, both the original and its recent revision, not only has the same glaring omissions as the original, but in some ways is actually worse. The original resolution called for some of the criminal behavior of Hamas, called out some of the criminal behavior of Hamas. The Levy amendment says nothing about the crimes of Hamas. It does not even use the word Hamas, as if the hostages magically appeared in Gaza. Of course, I recognize that the petitioners have received this criticism and have attempted to rebalance their resolution. Let me publicly thank them for making a concerted effort to lower the temperature. Of course, the original language was contributing to the rise in the temperature, which was already high. We addressed our reasons for that in our written submissions. Unfortunately, the new language still falls short for those still hurting in the wake of the October 7th attacks and the ongoing trauma concerning the hostages who are still being held. The reports by released hostages include stories of sexual assault, beatings, and psychological torture of children, such as forcing them to watch the murderous snuff films taken by Hamas operatives during the October 7th attack. These feelings continue to be raw. Also, the omission of the word Jews from the revised resolution is quite jarring, as it will be taken as a statement that the community experiencing ongoing trauma is limited to Israelis, thus severing the very real connection that most American Jews, although clearly not all, feel for Israel and their friends and relatives who live there. This community does not want to be lectured to, which is the feeling one gets when reading even the revised ceasefire resolution. This is a reality for a significant segment of the Brookline community. It is at the heart of what the Gladstone-Burstein Amendment seeks to address. A resolution as originally written has already stoked flames and caused hurt, which the petitioners will not now be able to address with their amendment, no matter how well-meaning. Significantly, even the new language fails to address the critical omissions that plagued the original resolution, which omissions Michael and I identified in our written remarks submitted a couple of weeks ago. There's suffering all over Gaza and all over Israel. People want to do something. I get that. I want to do something to alleviate the suffering too. I also don't want to increase the suffering going on in our own diverse community. Given the suffering, town meeting members will want to say yes to something. The newly proposed language by the petitioners will be parsed and dissected, and believe me, offense will be found. It will still be divisive. I am already hearing it. Again, we identified some of the significant omissions in our written materials, omissions which the petitioner's new language still does not address. The Gladstone-Burstein Amendment threads the needle. It is a positive and hopeful statement that people from all segments of the town can rally behind, as I expect you will see tonight and have already seen in the emails. I want to answer some questions which I'm anticipating. Our amendment purposely omits the word ceasefire. The word ceasefire is still present in the petitioner's revised language. The term ceasefire is a political victory for some segments of Brookline and not for others, even for those like us who would like to see the fighting stop from both sides. The versions that include the word ceasefire, if they pass, will generate the headlines, largely Jewish Brookline comes out for ceasefire, joining Somerville and Cambridge. If any details would be given at all about the actual language, that will not be until the third paragraph in this story. All nuance will be lost. I also want to point out another consequence if town meeting passes Article 19, even as amended by the petitioners or the Levy Amendment. If that happens, town meeting is on record as being critical of Israel in this instance. It will not be the last time town meeting is asked to opine about Israel. Passing Article 19 would almost certainly lead to multiple resolutions being brought to town meeting over the next few years concerning the occupation and calls for boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israel. This is not the best use of Brookline's time or energy. Finally, you may ask, what if the Biden administration's actions are disappointing to one segment of the community or the other? Actually, I expect that the actions of the Biden administration will be rejected by partisans from each camp. I also believe that most people in town meeting are willing to give the administration the maximum latitude to operate in an ever-changing situation without town meeting prejudging what tactics are acceptable and which are not. Only the Gladstone-Burstein Amendment avoids picking winners and losers in that debate. As a student of history of this region, I will make this observation. Israel has only ever taken risks for peace when it knows the U.S. has its back. Such an environment facilitated peace with Egypt and Jordan, the Oslo Accords, multiple peace officers to the PLO following Oslo, and most recently, the Abraham Accords. In that vein, let's be clear about what a ceasefire resolution directed at both sides is really doing. The United States has the ultimate leverage against Israel in that it is Israel's primary supplier of arms and ammunition. Iran is the primary supplier of arms and ammunition to Hamas. Calling on the United States to pressure both sides towards a ceasefire does not reflect political reality. What it is really doing is calling on Israel to stop firing and then hoping that Hamas has a constructive reaction. It is also a call to keep Hamas leadership and 4 military brigades in power, ready to cause a future war as they have promised to do over and over again, and have done several times since taking over Gaza in a military coup in 2006. Such a result will lead to the loss of more lives in the future, both Israeli and Palestinian, and will be an obstacle to any long-term peace. I'd like to make another historical observation. The Provisional IRA did not unilaterally agree to disarm and cease its attacks in Northern Ireland and beyond. They did so as a result of a negotiated end to hostilities brokered by Washington. If that is the result you imagine in Gaza, the Gladstone-Burstein Amendment is how you get there. Let me add 2 more things before concluding. First, Michael and I are very sensitive to the issue of anti-Semitism. We also are very concerned about how often expressions of anti-Zionism use anti-Semitic tropes, language, and symbols. Michael and I want to thank the petitioners for avoiding such expressions of anti-Semitism. To the extent that they have criticized the actions of the State of Israel, both in the original resolution and the recent amended language, they have done so in a way that avoids using anti-Semitic tropes, language, and symbols. It just goes to show that criticism of the action of Israel, even when unbalanced, can be done without being anti-Semitic. And we want to thank the petitioners for modeling that behavior. Second, I want to watch out for something that I noticed at the discussion before the Select Board. When Jewishly identified people spoke in favor of Article 19, some of them prefaced their remarks with the phrase, "as a Jew," before explaining why their value system required them to support Article 19. This phenomenon, in my opinion, illustrates one of the divisive aspects of Article 19 and the Levy Amendment. Any action of town government which compels people to say, in effect, "I am one of the good Jews," is by definition bad policy. Every one of the amendment petitioners are Jewish, as are some of the Article 19 petitioners. We are all suggesting different paths to end the war, free the hostages, end Hamas's terror regime, and get desperately needed aid to civilians in Gaza and rebuild that land for the Palestinian people. The Gladstone-Burstein Amendment calls for that result in the least prescriptive and least divisive way possible. Michael and I ask the petitioners to join us in our amendment, which will then lead to a genuine path towards healing our collective Brookline community. We call on the advisory board, this subcommittee, to vote no on the petitioner's resolution, even as amended, and no on the Levy amendment, and yes to Gladstone-Burstein's replacement motion. Thank you.
Ariel, is it Ariel speaking? Yeah. Ready?
Whenever you are, just let me know.
Go ahead.
My name is Ariel Soyer, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 2. Soyer-Shatz and I have put forward an amendment that calls for the immediate and unconditional return of hostages held in Gaza and for the immediate and unconditional surrender of Hamas. This evening, I will briefly outline the concerns with the original Article 19, discuss the horrendous conditions of the hostages being held in Gaza, and close with how our amendment will lead to a measure of justice and provide an avenue for a peaceful resolution. The original Article 19 is a wolf in sheep's clothing, but the clothing is wearing thin. Unlike the clothing of the women and girls that were sexually assaulted by the terrorist group Hamas, which was forcibly removed by Hamas as part of its campaign that also resulted in the murder of over 1,200 people. In just that one sentence, I've mentioned 3 ways that the original article is a wolf in sheep's clothing. First, this article ignores the systematic campaign of sexual violence that, among others, was recognized by the United Nations. Second, this article refers to Hamas as a militant group, while the Department of State has designated Hamas as a terrorist group. This designation was made in 1997, so the proponents of the original article have had plenty of time to understand this. Third, this article refers to killing instead of murder, suggesting that innocent partygoers at the Nova Festival or farmers at a kibbutz were justified targets. The authors of Article 19 have submitted a proposed amendment, removing the reference to Hamas as a militant group, but despite being aware of the sexual assaults, have declined to address that, as though it was not important. But that's not all. The original article, like a wolf in sheep's clothing, dresses itself in a bare semblance of neutrality that reveals itself to be a wolf when examined in the most cursory manner. While the original article calls for a cessation of all military acts, not terrorist acts, the amended article's authors call for a bilateral ceasefire, ignoring that a ceasefire existed on October 6th, ignoring that a ceasefire existed on December 1st, in each case until Hamas broke the ceasefire, and ignoring that Hamas has consistently refused a ceasefire in the months since. Pretending neutrality between the party that broke each ceasefire and refused any new ceasefire, and the party that accepted each ceasefire reveals the wolf. And yet the original article and amendment hides itself behind a thin veil of neutrality. The operative clauses are designed to do so by citing both the immediate return of hostages and a ceasefire as just one example. You'll note that this draws a false equivalence between an action that is just, the immediate return of the hostages, and a ceasefire that was previously violated by Hamas. This is absurd. Like a wolf in sheep's clothing, the original article leaves a lot hidden, including substantial war crimes that Hamas commits. Both the preambulatory and operative clauses ignore, 1, the thousands of rockets that were fired by Hamas indiscriminately at civilian targets from civilian locations, double war crime. 2, the refusal by Hamas to wear insignia to designate its forces, war crime. 3, the refusal by Hamas to locate its facilities separate from any civilian facilities, including using hospitals as bases, war crime. Each of these war crimes are important not only for being war crimes, but also because these are the direct cause of so much of the suffering that occurs among civilians in Gaza. Every life is precious, a universe to be preserved, and yet ordinary residents of Gaza suffer and die as a result of Hamas's deliberately chosen strategy to mix its personnel together with those residents. Calling for a ceasefire leaves Hamas in power at a huge cost to ordinary Gazans. This is only one of the many reasons why Hamas must unconditionally surrender, as demanded by our amendment to Article 19. In addition to these war crimes, Hamas has taken numerous actions against the ordinary residents of Gaza. When the Dogmush clan deployed personnel to assist in the distribution of food in northern Gaza, Hamas executed the sheikh, leader of the clan, and almost a dozen of its members. Similarly, Hamas personnel have captured an estimated 60 to 70% of the aid that goes into Gaza, often first keeping the aid for its own fighters and reselling the aid at a substantial markup to residents of Gaza. For these reasons as well, Hamas must unconditionally surrender, as demanded by our amendment. And yet another reason why Hamas must surrender is the treatment of the hostages that have been held in Gaza. As a result of the Hamas atrocities, I recently was unfortunate to learn a new word in Arabic. One branch of my family comes from an Arabic-speaking country. Sabaya, which means sex slave. When some members of Hamas captured young women in Israel, sex slave, or sabaya was how they described those young women. Amit Susana, in her powerful testimony, described being kept shackled to the bed when she was held in Gaza. Her captor groped her and forced her to perform a sex act. At one point, she was kept suspended between two couches while her captors beat her. Slavery in the 21st century demands justice. Moran Yanai described how they took away your freedom. They took everything. You have nothing. Nothing is really yours. Luis Har described a terrorist saying that the terrorist wanted to marry Luis's 17-year-old granddaughter, Mia Limberg, threatening the family with a commando knife while feeding them bare scraps of pita bread. Aviva Siegel described how terrorists would dress young women like dolls and would abuse them. And Liri Albag was forced to cook and clean for her captors, while not even being able to eat the food she was cooking. This abuse demands justice. These conditions of slavery demand justice. Among those still held by Hamas are a handful of Arabs from Israel, including Youssef Ziadna, Hamza Ziadna, and Qaid Farhan El-Qadi. Among those still held by Hamas are a handful of Americans, including Hirsch Goldberg Poland, Idan Alexander, Sagi Dekel Chen, Omer Nutra, Keith Siegel, Itai Chen, who died in captivity. We can only speculate at the conditions they are being held under, because Hamas does not allow the Red Cross to visit the hostages. Our amendment calls for the unconditional and immediate return of the hostages in Gaza. As we have discussed, every day that the hostages are being held, they are being abused. One day in the conditions that we have described is one day too many. And while we cannot go backward in time to return the time to the hostages, calling for the immediate and unconditional return of the hostages held in Gaza at least brings an end to this nightmare. There is no cosmic undo button that can allow us to go backwards in time and undo the great evils, the murder, the rape, the slavery that Hamas undertook and continues to undertake. As we've discussed, the victims of these actions are Israelis, Jews, Americans, Arabs. It's important to note that this includes Arabs ruled by Hamas in Gaza, who are slaughtered if they stand up to Hamas, as the Dogmush clan leadership was. In order for there to be a lasting peace, Hamas must be removed from the equation. The original Article 19 calls for a ceasefire of military acts, not terrorist acts, leaving Hamas in power and condemning the residents of Gaza to the continued rule of Hamas. The original Article 19 leaves Hamas free to carry out the October 7th attacks again and again, as Ghazi Hamad infamously suggested. Our proposed amendment calls for the unconditional surrender of Hamas and to get justice for the war crimes and slavery undertaken by Hamas. While we cannot go back in time, the least we can do is try to obtain justice. In your role as members of the advisory committee, I ask you to recommend the Soyer-Shatz amendment to Article 19 as the option that leads to a just resolution and therefore is the most likely to lead to long-term peace. Brookline residents have many different views on the Middle East, and we would be better off with a resolution that would be more likely to result in peace so that all of us can focus on issues closer to our town.
Lisa, you have a minute and 40 seconds.
Okay, I'll have to be brief. Okay. It is well known that Hamas is a terror organization committed to destroying Israel and replacing it with an Islamic caliphate. Its founding charter is hateful to Jews and ridden with anti-Jewish tropes like Jews were responsible for the French Revolution, the World War I, the Russian Revolution, among other hateful lies. The atrocities of October 7th are well known. Hamas spent years planning the attack, using $1 billion of aid money to construct tunnels instead of building infrastructure for its citizens. In preparation of the Israel Defense Force, the IDF's counteroffensive, Hamas booby-trapped buildings and tunnel shafts with explosives and used deceptions, such as recordings of crying babies for its warfare. Its strategy is to use human shields and place them in homes, schools, hospitals. It stands out in its cruelty that it wants as many civilians as possible to be killed to convince the world that Israel is committing war crimes. John Spencer, who is considered one of the world's leading experts on urban warfare, argues that Israel minimizes civilian deaths more than any army in history. In a recent Newsweek piece, he states, the international community, and increasingly the US, barely acknowledges the IDF's protective measures while repeatedly excoriating the IDF for not doing enough to protect civilians, even as it confronts a ruthless terror organization holding its citizens hostage. Instead,
You have 10 seconds.
okay. Instead, the US and its allies should be studying how they can apply the IDF's tactics for protecting civilians. Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Please. move. Mr. Levy, do you need assistance? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Levy, the author of the so-called Levy Amendment. And I want to give you a brief rundown on why I offered that amendment in the form I did. People have said that I have omitted important details about the history of Hamas and Israel and Gaza. And that history goes back a long, long way. There's been conflict between the local Palestinians and the Jewish settlers there, at least since the 19th century. And certainly by the 20th century, it was in full bloom. And the first thing that happened after Israel declared a nation was that the Arab world attacked. I don't have any illusions that this is a one-sided problem. I wish it were, because that'd make it easy to solve. And frankly, I don't see any solution, any way to solve this, the problem of Israel and Palestine and the Arab world. But I do see the news reports of children dying, of children suffering, of children starving to death in the 21st century. And I find that intolerable. And the purpose of my amendment is twofold. One is to draw attention to that fact, that condition, that totally immoral and unacceptable condition. And also to draw attention to the fact that you don't get anywhere by blaming the other side. You get more divisiveness and you don't get cohesion in the community that's being addressed. And we're addressing Brookline with these warrant articles. And there are strong feelings, as we've heard tonight, on all the sides of the issue. And I thought that it was best and least divisive not to point fingers. You know, it runs the danger of going into the schoolyard display of, well, he hit me first. No, he hit me first. No, she hit me first. That's pointless. I don't know if any of these amendments will actually change the course of events in Palestine, Israel. Well, I certainly know that none of them will get Hamas to surrender unconditionally. And I have severe doubts that all of Israel's armed forces won't be able to do it. They are very well entrenched and they can leave the country and come back. It's not something that can be done by a petition. But negotiation is the only way to do it. And one of the things that's called for in my amendment is that the international community get together and try to bring the parties together in some kind of negotiated peace. I'm not very sanguine about that, but it seems to me the only way to go. And in the short term, the problem is children are dying. And they're dying because they can't get food, they can't get clean water, their families can't find shelter. And that's what I wanted to focus on and simply say, this is wrong. I'm not saying who's in fault, who's primarily at fault, who's secondarily at fault, but the condition exists. And God forbid we should live with this on our conscience and say that we remained silent while it was happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our first speaker after the petitioners and those offering amendments is Michael Siegel.
I'll have a second. Thank you.
Hold on a second. You ready?
Yeah,
Go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
this is an issue on which Brookline has no jurisdiction whatsoever. It's divisive, it's distracting, and I urge the members for those reasons to vote no. Don't abstain, because then it'll be decided by the partisans. Vote no. Now, on the specifics, as has been mentioned, there was a ceasefire on October 6th. It was violated by Hamas, which has a genocidal charter and provided genocidal written instructions to its fighters to kill as many people as possible and bring others back for bounty. I find it shocking that the main resolution calls on Brookline to mourn the Hamas terrorists killed in the war. Refers to 30,000, quote, civilians in one of the resolutions, of which 13,000 are Hamas terrorists, and we should not be, as a town, calling on people to mourn them. There is no reference whatsoever to the Israeli soldiers who died, which I find particularly disturbing because one of them was my cousin, Dov Levenstein. The solution, as the Soyer-Shatz amendment calls for, is unconditional surrender by Hamas. It would end the fighting. It would provide a legal obligation for Israel to ensure flow of aid, and it would release the hostages. That's unlikely to happen. Hamas has refused that. So the only solution on the table is the one that President Biden has supported, which is to defeat Hamas. When the Japanese attacked us in Pearl Harbor, Brookline didn't call for a ceasefire a few months later. When we were entering Germany in World War II, Brookline didn't call for a ceasefire to save German civilians, of which 10 times as many died as Gazan civilians, and nobody goes around talking about that as genocide. One of my German colleagues told me the reason that
Please conclude.
democracy worked was that the
I'm
Nazis
sorry, your
defeated.
time is up.
That's what we need to do here.
Thank you. Mel Schuman.
Thank you. My name is Mel Schuman from Precinct 13. This war is horrible, but the proposed resolution does nothing to help end it and may actually do something to help prolong it. I'll focus on just one of the reasons the call for an immediate ceasefire is misplaced and counterproductive. I'm wearing this necklace this evening, which says, "Bring them home now," referring to the hostages held in Gaza by Hamas, which cynically exploits the hostages and the well-being of its own citizens to extract more and greater concessions. What country or people would ever cease fire while its citizens continue to be held by a genocidal regime dedicated to its destruction, which just perpetrated a heinous, vulgar attack on its citizens and promised to do so over and over and over again? It is unconscionable to call for a ceasefire in these circumstances, particularly given that Israel has repeatedly agreed to terms proposed for a humanitarian ceasefire, and when it is the unwillingness of Hamas to agree to those terms, including the release of hostages, that is preventing a ceasefire from going into effect. In fact, the growing calls for an immediate ceasefire only embolden Hamas in its obstinance in failing to release the hostages. Thus, the proposed resolution has it entirely backwards, its emphasis being on an immediate ceasefire rather than the return of the hostages, which actually would result in a ceasefire. I implore the advisory board to reject this misguided resolution, which does nothing to advance the cause of peace. This resolution is deeply hurtful to a vast majority of Jewish people at a time of rising hate towards Jews. I hate to be overly dramatic, but if this resolution passes at town meeting, I won't feel the same way about this town as I do now. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to have our first speaker on Zoom, and I just want to I guess ask a general question. I'm not, I found a town meeting where speakers have 3 minutes and the moderator after 2.5 minutes says you've got 30 seconds and what have you. I mean, I can give people a heads up if you would prefer that. I find that distracting, and I think you're probably better off just running through the clock and stopping when the bell goes off. If anyone comes up to the podium or who's on Zoom wants a heads up, tell me before we start the clock and I'll be happy to do that. The next speaker is Shira Fisher, who is speaking to us remotely. Shira, let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and I'll speak briefly. My name is Shira Fisher. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 11. I'm very personally connected to this issue with family and friends directly affected, but I do not want to be here. I do not think we should be having this hearing. I would love if you cut me off and ended this public comment time. AC should not be weighing in on this non-binding resolution. There are no financial implications. As you've said, you don't always weigh in, so no need to do so. I desperately want this war to end. I appreciate the revisions to the resolution that much improve it, and what Omar said resonates with me deeply. But no one is waiting for us to make statements to end it, especially for us to do so in late May. I agree with Mark that nothing we say here will change what happens. It's an active situation, changing by the minute. People are still dying daily. Iran is threatening to get involved. We have no idea what will be by the time May comes. This is proof that this is not the right time or place for this kind of declaration or demand for any kind of action. There are people who can change things, and they are not us. Write to them, petition them. Let's write to them together, but not town meeting. I note that town taxes are not involved at all in foreign affairs, and the previous examples of where we've weighed in are about US policy, not other countries' policies. Why only Israel? The term ceasefire is loaded, as Scott said, even with the edits made. Hopefully it will all be irrelevant by the time we vote with the war over, but we are still being forced to debate this, spend hours in meetings on something that will make no difference in the precious lives of those involved, and something that just brings division to our community. There are other places to have these conversations. Town meeting needs to focus on what we can do in Brookline. The AC should not take any position on this because we should not be making a statement on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Liz Linder, and we don't know if she's speaking remotely or in person. Here she is. Okay. Let me know when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you. And if you could give me like a 10-second heads up,
Sure.
that would be great.
Okay. Happy to. Go ahead.
Okay. It's been said that certain roads are paved with good intentions. I'm speaking as someone whose parent came here as a refugee from global conflict and as a town meeting member for Precinct 4. I don't want to even talk about how the people in my family are involved. The war with Israel and Gaza is a full-blown humanitarian crisis. We all agree in this room, I'm sure of that. Horrific, tragic, frightening on many levels, and difficult to witness from many perspectives. But that is not the point of my comments. I'm commenting because town meeting is not the place for Warrant Article 19. The idea that our local volunteer-based town government is proposing to weigh in on and make recommendations around a proxy war in the Middle East, while presumably well-intentioned, is outside the purview of local town government. It's beyond our scope of work, not beyond our scope of hard discussions, but beyond our scope of work to weigh in on foreign policy. I might add, in which we have no security briefings, access to, nor sway with the federal government. It's performative, not effective, and points us in the wrong direction, both within our community and as a community. This article, with its initial resolutions and subsequent amendments and revisions amidst rapidly changing news and recent events in town that have prompted the potential for police presence at this very meeting, has in effect amplified local conflict among political, religious, ethnic, and other divides. Local communities can and should have impact in global events. Towns like Brookline can be welcoming and open by condemning anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and racism, by welcoming refugees fleeing conflict, by adopting sanctuary provisions. Where local conflict resolution is possible, greater conflict resolution is possible. If the intention behind Warrant Article 19 at its core is a plea for peace with a focus on easing conflict, and the petitioners are receptive as they seem to be with the aim of effective governance, I ask that they
10
go
seconds.
significantly further and consider, or the advisory board and select board included, consider withdrawing Article 19 from town meeting or radically structuring it to strike counter-effective language and incorporate what a local government
you.
can actively
Thank you.
do
Thank
in
you.
the community
Thank
to
you.
protect individuals
Thank you.
and groups
Your time
and
is up.
reduce
Liz.
conflict. Thank you.
Amir Grinstein. Ready? Go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me to speak. My name is Amir Greenstein. I oppose the original resolution presented, and I'll explain why using the three hats that I wear: a Brooklyn resident, a trust builder between Israelis and Palestinians in the startup space, and a business school professor at Northeastern, focusing on the ways the current discussion is or not contributing to Brookline. As a Brookline resident, I think as a town, we have other priorities than a conflict in the Middle East or elsewhere, on which we have zero impact. At the individual level, of course, protest, vote, write letters, but I want the town's elected official to focus on their attention on, for example, our budget or school-related challenges. As a co-founder of an organization that built trust between very diverse entrepreneurs, Israelis and Palestinians, I can tell you that having a symbolic resolution, especially when it is viewed as one-sided, but regardless, having a statement as a goal is not the way to build trust among different groups in Brookline. Just see what happened in other towns that issued such a statement in terms of divisiveness. Finally, as a business school professor studying social change and interventions to mitigate polarization, I would urge to direct the town's efforts into a different direction that will benefit Brookline's residents, support our schools and communities in the development of critical skills, how to hold multiple truths, what I call paradoxical mindset, how to be empathetic to other people's pain, how to accept perspective diversity, the type of deep-level diversity that allows for creativity, better listening, meaningful learning, and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. Arthur Conquest.
Good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Brown, for being so patient. Really very professional, okay, and very helpful. And I just want to tip my hat to you. Thank you very much. Arthur Conquest, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. 4 days ago, 4th of April, was the 58 years since Dr. Martin Luther King was tragically assassinated on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. And it was a year before to that day that Dr. King delivered his famous Vietnam speech at the Riverside Church in New York City. I quote, "This I believe to be the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than the nationalism and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions. We are called to speak for the weak, for the homeless, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls our enemies. For no documented from human hands can make the humans any less our brothers." Quote, Dr. King goes on to say, and I quote again, "We must speak when machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, extreme nationalism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. We must speak when the anti-Semitism and Islamophobics slip in through the cracks of the back door by supposedly progressive spaces, when Palestinian children in refugee camps are bombed and killed, when schools and hospitals and entire neighborhoods are laid waste. We must speak when the international law is treated like a native suggestion. We must speak."
Please conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Stephen Schulman.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. The revised proposed amendment is an improvement. I think the amendment is well-intentioned. There's been enormous suffering by Israelis and Palestinians, including death, captivity, destruction of property, and long-lasting trauma is sure to follow. My heart goes out to every person harmed by this war. Nevertheless, even with the changes made in the amendment, I still object to the amendment for the following reasons. I don't believe that local government should weigh in on international affairs, as this is not within the expertise of the city officials. Nor do I believe that weighing in is appropriate in a town where the issue is so contentious. At a previous hearing, 47 citizens signed up to speak. The majority spoke against the amendment. Second, Hamas, an organization classified as a terrorist organization, started the violence, killing, dismembering, raping, kidnapping citizens of all ages, and destroying homes, farms, and other property. Hamas is unabashedly proud of the violence, inhumane attack on October 7th, and has boasted it will attack Israel again. A ceasefire will give Hamas time to rearm and continue to plan its strategy of using innocent Palestinians as human shields. Third, any call for a ceasefire must be accompanied by an immediate and simultaneous release of hostages. There are believed to still be 130 hostages, about 30 of whom are believed to be dead. Fourth, pressure, including from the United States, is currently being used to provide more humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. Finally, Hamas is carrying out the war with support of Iran. Both Iran and Hamas are committed to eradicating the state of Israel. Israel is an important ally of the United States and a democracy in the part of the world where there are few, if any, others. For the above reasons, I oppose the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Harold Szymanski, via Zoom, I think.
Hi, can folks hear me okay?
Yep, whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm Harold Szymanski, Town Meeting Member for Precinct 9. I'm here to speak in favor of the Soyer-Shatz Amendment, which specifically calls on Town Meeting to support a just resolution leading to peace and an end to Israel's war with Hamas. The reason for my support of this amendment is because I believe that we must first and foremost recognize the true obstacle to peace, and that is unquestionably Hamas. It has been said numerous times by numerous people, but it is worth repeating. This war would not be happening except for Hamas, and the horrors of this war would end immediately if Hamas would put down their arms and free all 133 of the remaining hostages or their remains. This is now more important than ever as the brutal assault and sexual violence against the hostages continue. Changing gears, I now wish to directly address the sponsors of the Warrant Article 19. I say to you, enough. Whatever you've thought the effect of this Warrant article would be, your only result has been to create an atmosphere of divisiveness and a culture of disdain. The notion that a subcommittee of the advisory committee would actually require the presence of police to keep order and protect participants is so absolutely astounding to me and candidly enrages me. It is time for the divisiveness to end. Let Town Meeting get back to work to which we were elected, including to steward a $400 million budget and to promote the general welfare of all Brookline residents. For this reason, I am calling on the sponsors of Warrant Article 19 to withdraw it and/or the advisory committee to vote no action on it. If this article must go forward, I encourage all to support the Soyer-Shatz Amendment to promote a just and stable peace in the region.
Thank you.
Thank you. Susie Davidson.
Thank you. I'm a Brookline homeowner, journalist, and author, and I am in favor of Warrant Article 19 and its amendment. I feel that we and our town do need to take humanitarian stands, and not because it makes me a better Jew. It just makes me truthful to my feelings. I could mention that Israel took 71% of the land in 1948, killed 12,000 Palestinians who had been living there for generations, and displaced 750,000 of them. I could say that every proposed peace plan that Hamas, the people are saying refused, was also not fair. It was also not 50-50, which it should have been. These are our cousins. But tonight, I am not speaking for myself any longer. I'm speaking for former Brookline residents, Rila Fund, Michael Gruenbaum, Meyer Hack, Sylvia Hack, Edgar Krasa, Michael Kraus, Ben Kaczynski, and Ida Rosenberg. I have heard people mention the Holocaust and World War II as a justification and some of the reasoning for this war. These people were Holocaust survivors who I interviewed for this book in 2005. They were among 24, and every single one of them said this to me. Please listen. No more wars, no more killing. We do not want to be associated with any more wars. We want peace. Please do not use the Holocaust as justification for any future wars. I heard this from their own mouths. Despite all that they went through, they were peaceful people who wanted peace. In their blessed memories, I ask that you not bring up the Holocaust as justification
Thank you.
for killing
Thank you for your comment.
33,000 Gaza civilians.
for your comments.
Thank you.
I apologize in advance if I don't pronounce this correctly, but Shan Guo on Zoom.
I'm a longtime Brookline resident, and I'm here to speak in support of the Warrant Article 19 for ceasefire. There's been misinformation circulating, so I want to reiterate to the opponents of this warrant article exactly what they are fighting so hard to silence. This resolution condemns the terrorist acts of Hamas on October 7th and calls for return of all hostages, bilateral ceasefire, humanitarian aid into Gaza, and an end for all forms of hate, including anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. An argument we've heard is that Warrant Article 19 is divisive and threatens to tear the town apart. However, it's not this resolution people should be worried about, but the silence and inaction of our town in the face of an ongoing humanitarian crisis funded by our taxpayer dollars that will keep us divided. This warrant article for ceasefire is a product of the Brookline Peace Coalition, an interfaith group of people who've been drawn together for the singular purpose to advocate for peace and justice in Palestine and Israel, and also within our community. Members of our group include those who are Jewish, Muslim, Palestinian, and Israeli, many of whom will speak tonight in favor of ceasefire, as well as some of whom have been unfortunately excluded from the civic process today, as once again this important town hearing falls during Iftar, and now during the most holy 10 days of Ramadan. I also want to take the time to acknowledge many of our Muslim community members who are here at great personal and religious sacrifice to speak with truth and courage. It is easy to call for peace and unity in retrospect and in the aftermath of a catastrophic tragedy, but it takes much more courage to stand united against injustice as it happens. I hope our town will stand on the right side of history, as it has many times in the past, regarding issues in Brookline and globally, and to pass a resolution that affirms that all life is equally sacred.
Thank you very much. Akiva Leibowitz.
Thank you. As an Israeli American, I'm speaking here not for the first time to support Warrant Article 19. My words emanate from who I am as a human, as a Jew, as a citizen of Israel whose 4 children were born and raised in Beersheba, a mere 40-minute drive from Gaza. I remain in awe of how the ceasefire resolution, which seeks to, even if only symbolically, put an end to the bloodshed, starvation, misery, which is afflicting those who are sharing the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, can be perceived as radical and divisive, controversial, when it speaks to the basic tenets of humanism and empathy. The writers of this resolution went to great lengths to avoid language that may spark more controversy or may be offensive. They clearly, unapologetically empathize and sympathize with the victims of the horrendous attacks of October 7th, the Israeli hostages, and with the tens of thousands of victims in Gaza and the hundreds of thousands who are starving. For those who claim otherwise, I wonder whether they actually read the text of the resolution. This town, whose majority electorate self-defines themselves as progressive, should embrace such a humanistic approach and cannot dismiss the opportunity to take a moral stand and express solidarity. And the concern for widespread popular acceptance cannot trump fundamental values. Our heart should have space and compassion for all suffering, and that message should resonate loud and clear. In 2 weeks, many in this room will be sitting in the Passover Center, pointing to the matzah on their table and calling halach ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction. This is the bread of affliction and persecution that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. But this is also a call to action, to move away from our comfort zone and proactively work to end affliction, persecution, hunger, devastation, and misery wherever it might be present. And with this strikes so close to home for many of us, even more so. Former Israeli member of Knesset and Minister of Education and the current president of Beit Berel Academic College, Professor Yuli Tamir, concludes in an article titled, "We Israelis are all complicit in the starvation of civilians in Gaza. None of this means that they or we deserve to starve to death, to be killed by a rocket, by a knife, or by a bomb. But it does mean that
Please
there's a
conclude.
responsibility that we may
Thank you.
speak out against
Thank
the
you.
government that makes us complicit."
Eva,
against our-
thank you. I have, oh, you want to see her on Zoom? Elizabeth Schaefer? So, I'm sorry? Well, that's where she's supposed to be, but she's not on Zoom. So we're going to move ahead, and if Ms. Schaefer comes back, we'll find a way to fit her in. The next speaker is Jamila Arcilla.
Good evening. My name is Jamila Arcilla, and I'm a Brookline resident here to speak in favor of adopting the Petitioners Amendment to Warrant Article 19. I am a Palestinian American in the third generation of diaspora, which began with the migration of my grandparents shortly after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. All of the horror we feel is real, and now thousands of children are dead. Attempts to excuse this are misdirection, obfuscation, and erasure. I will not speak in detail about the current atrocities because we do not know their extent and impact. From Etel Adnan, death is never in plural. There are not millions of deaths. It happens millions of times that someone dies. When my family arrived in Brookline after a lifetime abroad, I was tasked with hosting a dinner for extended family. I had to roll grape leaves, which meant I had to find bones. Whole Foods does not keep their lamb bones, and I was otherwise clueless. I called my mom and told her I was going with chicken stock instead. I could hear her rolling her eyes when she said, "Are you telling me there's no kosher butcher in Brookline?" You see, my family holds a memory of actual coexistence, which predates by centuries October 7, 2023, and the Nakba in 1948. Before October 7th, my most meaningful conversations on these issues were held with Jewish and Israeli friends and neighbors, and in the terrible aftermath, comfort came readily from those same friends. Our community has a more intimate connection to the tragedy than most in the country, and we should feel a collective obligation to make clear our position that no more children need to die violently in their sleep or quietly of starvation. I feel that obligation in that room. I have felt it over the last 6 months. I found the bones. A diverse group came together to raise this article, and the spirit of compromise is present in the fight Petitioners Amendment. Rather than risk of division, this room is an embodiment of what should be happening across two oceans. If a message of
Jamila?
peace can come from Brookline, Massachusetts,
Jamila?
it is also a message that peace is possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Ralph Minichiello. Sorry.
My name is Ralph Minichiello. I'm from Precinct 8. I've been a Brookline resident for 34 years. I've raised 2 children in Brookline who've attended kindergarten through high school. I've coached many soccer teams in Brookline, and have had many relationships and friendships and have experienced the ethnic and religious diversity of our community. My family reflects that diversity. My wife's Jewish. My 2 children are Jewish. I was born Catholic, but I'm an atheist. My son-in-law and brother and sister-in-law are Muslims. In our household, we practice Ramadan, Easter, and Passover. My family, I think, can reflect this community, but it is on a basis of community understanding, of empathy, compassion, and appreciation for the differences among us. It is also a common sense of justice, of doing what is right. It is in that spirit that I speak in favor of Article 19. Passing Article 19 is the only humane and compassionate way in which to build and strengthen our community as the tragedy unfolds in Gaza. Avoiding the controversy and leaving everyone to their own side or worse suspicion will only allow hatred and conflict to fester. But by placing a moral marker of compassion, empathy, humanity, and showing what Brooklyn stands for, we can rally our community. We have seen this, I've seen this in action in the Brookline Peace Coalition, where a diverse group of religious and ethnic people have come together, have shared their differences from Israelis, from Palestinians, and have come together in Article 19, where we try to lead with that sense of compassion, understanding, and empathy. Tonight, I'm asking the advisory committee to take that stand and not wash their hands of this matter, but stand up and say, we're going to lead with compassion, empathy, and understanding, and a sense of justice. It's the only basis, a lasting basis, which a community can be built on. I want to be able to tell my 18-year-old granddaughter, 18-month-old granddaughter, when she gets old enough, Jiti, when she asks me, Jiti, what did you do when the things were happening in Gaza? I want to be able to say, I stood with Muslims and Jews and Christians and tried to bring our community together to stand for aid to people in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry to have to interrupt people like that every couple of minutes. I mean, I wish we had more time tonight to be able to give people more time to talk. And I'm asking everyone to, please, when the time is done, even if you're mid-sentence, just stop, because other people have, and I just think it's the courteous thing to do, given the rules tonight. It's really uncomfortable for us to sit here and have to continue to say something, because, I'd love to hear more from everybody. But we're just trying to be fair. I apologize. Rashad Batley, who is on Zoom. Batley, thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. We can.
Sorry for the audio quality. No time reminder necessary. My name is Rashad Batley. I'm with Precinct 12. The reason the conflict in Israel and Palestine is impossible to solve is because one party is able to act with total impunity, both financial and political impunity on the global stage, thanks to the unconditional support of the United States. The way that changes is through the grassroots support of individual communities like Brookline. In my view, the very strength of Article 19 is that it's performative and intended to send a message favoring peace and unity. Those who stay silent in the midst of the global atrocities are the means by which such atrocities are perpetuated and repeated. It is also worth noting that during Israel's assault on Gaza, 3 hostages have been killed and 2 rescued, not to mention the unknown numbers who've been killed in accidental bombings. For that reason, I believe calling for the release of hostages and not calling for a ceasefire should logically be mutually exclusive. Finally, I believe it is purposefully naive to say that there was a ceasefire on October 7th. There has been a total domination and subjugation of the Palestinians by a settler colonial state for 75 years now. We must call for a ceasefire for the future and future safety of both Israelis and Palestinians. And last thing, as a native Arab speaker, Sabaya means girls, not sex slaves. Thank you.
Excuse me. Hey, excuse me. Excuse me.
Hey.
Excuse me.
Come on now.
Please,
Come on now.
please.
The sun
not-
and the moon are lying today.
It's not, it's,
Excuse me.
let's, folks, please. Let's take it, let's just,
Thank you.
let's relax, okay? You know, we maybe should have instituted a rule of no applause. And maybe we should ask people to do that going forward because applauding for certain things apparently can be hurtful. And so, you know, we're trying to keep the temperature down here. That's what's most important, I think, is to have civil conversation, courteous discourse, and just trying to avoid any particular issues. So. Okay, please, I'm not looking for comments. Please, I'm not looking for comments. Please, hey. Let's stop. I'll tell you what, what is it, 8:30? Let's take a 5-minute bathroom break. All right? Let's, I'm sorry. I think that we need a bathroom break.
May I say something, please?
Yes,
May I
sure.
say something? Excuse me. I would like to say something, okay? This whole situation, right? The reason why we're sitting here right now is important, okay? As far as we're concerned, it is important enough for us to take a 5-minute break, settle down, and come back with cooler heads. The sun and moon are lying today, y'all. Come on, man, okay? 5 minutes, we'll be back. Thank you. 5 minutes, we'll be back. Thank you.
I need to stand anyway. The watch has been reminding me I need to stand, you know?
Are we being recorded? Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to see.
We're being recorded. So, yeah.
Thank you for doing everything to prepare for this meeting. It was enormously.
It's been quite
I'm gonna
Say, I'm gonna.
Everybody, we're going to recon. If everyone could take their seats, please. Our next speaker is Amira El-Bakri. And before she starts, I want to just make two comments. There are some folks who are having trouble logging in to Zoom, and of course, they may not be able to hear this, but if any of them are your friends and they're asking for any help, please direct them to the town calendar where the link is for them to log in. I think that's what we're trying to do up here. It's hard to answer emails and pay attention at the same time, though. Second is I want to reiterate something I said in my original comments, which is that please don't comment on anything anyone else has said for any reason. Just keep information, keep your reactions to yourself, because there's no positive that comes out of that. Thank you. Amira, are you here?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Tell me when you're ready.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I would like to speak now. Thank you very much. My name is Amira. I'm a Brookline resident, and I'm here today to support Article 19, calling for a ceasefire, because it's time to remind the world that seems to have forgotten that human lives matter equally, because this resolution mourns the lives of hundreds of Israeli civilians, as well as the tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian lives lost since October 7. Because it acknowledges our shared pain and infinite outrage towards action that threaten the very essence of our humanity. We should never have to debate a simple truth that absolutely nothing justifies indiscriminate mass murder of humans. In the past 6 months, we have seen a historically unprecedented rate of human suffering. We've seen a father holding the remains of his children in a plastic bag, entire families wiped out in seconds, women having C-sections without anesthesia, and thousands of children dying in forced starvation and preventable disease. And I refuse to believe that in this world and in our community, this incredible cruelty can be ignored, let alone justified or even celebrated. Collective punishment is a crime against humanity against which we should all stand. And I'm here because despite my anguish and despair, I too am complicit with my silence and inaction and my tax dollars that pay for this. Because it's not just my moral obligation, but also because the devastation of this conflict reaches all the way here, because it is a local issue. Because in this community, people I have known and broken bread with and hosted their children in my home have stopped speaking to me just because of who I am as an Arab, as a Muslim, as a believer in Palestinian freedom equally to every other freedom. And I wonder then, do they also think that my life is worth less than theirs? Or do they think that in some scenario, my child's life can be shrugged off as collateral damage? And it breaks my heart. And this is why I'm here. This resolution speaks against this reality for myself and my community, as well as the reality of the people of Gaza. It empowers us to stand together, united against hate, against racism, against division. And we can all recognize together that history has taught us repeatedly that violence never yields peace, and none of us are safe until everyone is safe. That we can say along millions across the world that support this. It's not on our name and not on our watch. Never again is never again for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sana Haroon.
Thank you. My name is Sana Haroon, and I'm a resident of Brookline in Precinct 6. I am here to support the amended warrant, Article 19. This resolution presents a position of moral clarity with its focus on promoting peace and its emphasis on the value of life across the Israel-Palestine divide. We have a civic responsibility here to examine the role of the US abroad. We can and we must collectively express to our elected representatives that the United States has a moral duty to use its power to stop violence, to allow humanitarian relief to reach those in Gaza, and to enable a release of hostages. The Soyer-Shatz amendment opposing the ceasefire accuses the New York Times, The Guardian, and the BBC of spreading lies when reporting Israeli strikes leading to civilian deaths. It flatly denies United Nations and other reports that famine is imminent in Gaza. It asks you to ignore all accounts of Israel's deliberate targeting of Palestinian civilians, aid workers, doctors, and journalists. And it denies the critical need for a ceasefire and a cessation of these attacks. The Gladstone-Burstein amendment also opposes a ceasefire, asking that we instead stand aside and wait for the Biden administration to act. But it is the Biden administration's very failure to act that brings me here today. This is not an act of hostility. Yes, we in Brookline are divided. To be united, we must unequivocally commit to the very values that drive our local agenda of anti-racism and land acknowledgement, and unite these with our global outlook. We must reaffirm our belief in independent journalism, in international humanitarian organizations, and the humanity of all. We must reaffirm the right of 2 million in Gaza and the 240 hostages taken by Hamas to life, safety, food, healthcare, water, and freedom.
Thank you. On Zoom, Eddie Stromfels.
Hi all, my name is Eddie Stromfels. You see him pronouns, and I'm a current resident in Precinct 10. Here tonight to speak in favor of the WA-19 and the amendment submitted by the original petitioners. So I just want to first express my gratitude to the original petitioners for their work in writing and putting together this article, which would have our town join the likes of Cambridge, Somerville, Medford, Northampton, and many other towns across Massachusetts, along with cities like Chicago and Seattle across the country, in calling for an immediate ceasefire ending the war in Gaza. Since the October 7th Hamas attack, which killed 1,200 Israelis and kidnapped some 240 others, the IDF has killed over 30,000 Gazans, 14,000 of them children, in addition to hundreds of journalists and humanitarian aid workers. Gaza has been decimated, and its homes, hospitals, schools, and more have been destroyed by bombs made by the United States and launched by Israel. Despite 6 months of invasion and occupation, we are today no closer to the release of any hostages, Israeli or Palestinian, and instead draw closer and closer to an expanded conflict which can only mean further death and destruction for all civilians trapped in the crosshairs. The only path that leads us away from further suffering and devastation is that of peace, and the actions of the Biden administration are decisive in determining if the next decade is one of endless war or of peace and reconciliation. I desperately hope we can one day say our town did our part to put us on the path towards peace, and the first step is to join in with the majority of Americans who want to see a permanent ceasefire now. I'll just conclude by saying that in all the years I've lived in Brookline, I have seen and been a part of my fair share of heated and contentious issues, and as difficult as they have been, I've never seen the kind of threatening and frankly shameful behavior as I have in the past 6 months. I've seen posters for peace, mourning the death of children defaced and destroyed. I've seen elders harassed by strangers on the train. I've even had a dear friend surrounded and threatened for displaying the Palestinian flag. It's critical that we as a community urge ourselves forward to a place of healing and mutual understanding. And that
Thank you,
simply
Eddie.
cannot happen until there's a
Eddie,
ceasefire.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also in Zoom, Nada Almansi.
I'm ready. Okay. Hi, I'm speaking today in favor of Warrant Article 19 and the proposed amendment by the original petitioners. I'm a proud Muslim Arab American, and the last 6 months have been incredibly painful. Over 30,000 Palestinians murdered is not just a number, and each one of those people had a life and loved ones and dreams. Over 13,000 of those murdered were children, a fact we should not be able to live with. We've seen children losing limbs, carrying the remaining parts of their siblings in plastic bags, losing their parents, being starved to death, begging the world to stop their killing in a televised children's press conference back in November. I wonder how many of those children who pleaded with us to save them are still alive. I'm a mother, and I see my children in every one of them. We've seen mothers mourning, having C-sections without anesthesia, going out to get food for their families, only to return to them murdered. We've seen men try to stand strong for their families as they carry their lifeless children's bodies, and journalists who reported on their own family's death while they try to show the world what is happening to them. I'm asking Brookline to follow suit with so many towns in the US and call for an immediate ceasefire. I want to tell my children that Muslim Arab children like them matter. This isn't just another conflict somewhere far away. Our government is choosing to ignore the majority of Americans in favor of a ceasefire and is using our tax dollars to pay for bombs instead of funding our schools. And as taxpayers, this isn't just an international issue. Many in our community have personal ties to the Middle East, and we need to stand together and find a common humanity. I hope everyone here wants all the hostages released, Palestinian and Israeli, and wants the killing to stop and Palestinians to have access to as much humanitarian aid as possible and a chance to rebuild. I hope we can agree that that's just a start and the bare minimum we'll accept. The only time hostages were released was during a temporary ceasefire. And if you are concerned for their lives and the lives and freedom of Palestinians, you should be in favor for a ceasefire and a lasting peace. Anything less than that is unacceptable. Thank you.
Maya Diane? Yep. Sure.
I'm Maya Diane, an Israeli American and a Brookline resident in favor of the petitioner's amended ceasefire resolution. October 7th was harrowing, and like most of those with links to Israel, I am one point of contact removed away from victims, from hostages who were later found dead, and from festival attendees who barely survived the massacre. I don't know what October 7th would have felt like had I not been able to hear my grandparents' voices on the other end of the line. I can only imagine how Palestinians and those with loved ones in Gaza felt when Israel cut power and cell reception, how it feels 6 months later, when even a minor illness can become life-threatening, as famine is taking hold, when aid workers are targeted and flower lines turn into massacres. A poll last month found that 60% of Gazans had lost at least one family member in this war. I can only begin to comprehend the scale of devastation born of collective punishment. International law was developed in the aftermath of the Holocaust to affirm that human rights transcend national sovereignty, that no matter how convinced one state or government is that their actions are justified, they are not the ultimate judges of their actions' legitimacy. Israel has repeatedly and blatantly violated international law. There comes a limit to how much destruction championed by leaders who have publicly voiced their genocidal intent can be labeled as self-defense. There's also a limit to my understanding of how a resolution asking for a ceasefire, for the return of the hostages, and for a lasting peace can be labeled as an endorsement of Hamas. I implore you to approve the resolution with the petitioner's amendments. Thank you.
Susan Etzkovitz.
My name is Susan Etzkovitz. I've been a resident of Brookline for 47 years. I am Jewish. I'm writing in support of Warrant Article 19 and the amendment filed by the original petitioners. I am another Jewish mother against the slaughter of Palestinian children. That is what my sign says, a sign that has been photographed hundreds of times. When I'm not at a rally or a protest in support of an immediate ceasefire, I stand in Coolidge Corner with my sign around my neck. Many people pass by who don't even look at me. Many people pass by who do. Many of those people stop and chat for a moment and thank me for being there with a message. There are more appreciative folks than there are those who shake their heads and utter obscene comments. I stand there because I have to do something. After all, I am a human being, and I cannot fathom how we can still be discussing this when more than 33,000 Palestinians have been murdered, others maimed, missing, starving to death, and all of it taking place right before our eyes. This is not only an international and national issue, it is a Massachusetts issue and a local issue that impacts all of us human beings, as well as those of us who pay taxes. Our share in Massachusetts is $478,856,000. For example, we could instead hire at least 2,500 nurses, build about 45,000 housing units, pay for about 32 Head Start slots for children. Are we not a progressive town? Should we not stand on the correct side of history? We cannot and should not let another second go by without calling for an immediate and lasting ceasefire in Gaza.
Thank you. Shoshana Ehrlich.
Thank you. My name is Shoshana Ehrlich. I'm a longtime resident of Brookline. I am here tonight to speak in favor of the petitioner's amended version of Warrant Article 19. On January 30th, the Office of the High Commission for UN Human Rights declared that, quote, Gaza is a massive human rights crisis and a humanitarian disaster. As a professor of gender studies at UMass Boston, I want to zero in on the gender dimensions of this crisis. Not only have approximately 70% of those killed been women and children, but Palestinian women and girls have been systematically stripped of their rights to bodily integrity, which is an integral dimension of the international human rights ecosystem. First, menstruation. Menstrual health and dignity requires access to pads, tampons, water, sanitation, and disposal facilities, all of which are human rights. Due to the dire lack of these, some women and girls are taking period-delaying pills, which have serious side effects. Also, the serious risk of UTIs and infection of the reproductive tracts. Pregnancy. Women aren't getting prenatal care. They are malnourished, underweight, and that's leading to babies being born seriously underweight. According to CARE, an international relief organization, there's been a 300% increase in miscarriages. Childbirth. Those lucky enough to make it to a hospital risk serious infection and medical complications due to lack of unsanitary conditions, lack of supplies. Most dire is the performance, as others have mentioned, of C-sections without anesthesia. Women are often discharged within 3 hours of giving birth in a hospital, and some as little as discharged within a half hour. Others give.
Please conclude.
Okay. As Jews were taught to pursue justice for all, includes women and girls in power.
Ruvi?
Thank you. Dear members of the Advisory Committee, thank you for listening to the comments today. My name is Ruvi Kitov. I'm a Brookline resident running for town meeting in Precinct 6. By now, thousands of hours have been spent by many people as a result of this warrant article. Hundreds of people in the community, including many town meeting, select board, and advisory committee members, are discussing the article, the amendments, how people will vote, and the views of the candidates in email threads, Zoom meetings, and chat groups. At the end of May, town meeting will convene to discuss important matters related to Brookline. But very few people are talking about things like the 2025 budget or the proposed changes to zoning bylaws for accessory dwelling units, just to name a couple. Article 19 has completely taken over the town discussion because it asks us to take a moral stance on a situation thousands of miles away that is so complex that none of the experts have been able to resolve it yet. You can see how divisive the article is just based on the comments and the feelings here today, and the fact that for many people, this article has become the litmus test for candidates running for office in Brookline. Think for a moment about how unproductive and harmful this is to town, that voters are picking candidates based on how they're going to vote on the article instead of what the candidate's stances are on what truly matters to the functioning of Brookline. Regarding the content, the wording of the amendment article is still misguided, one-sided, and squarely puts the blame on Israel. The word ceasefire has not been taken out since the main objective of the article is to provide some victory that will allow the petitioners to say, Brookline voted for a ceasefire. If people are looking for the Biden administration to put pressure on Israel, I believe we're seeing that already without Brookline having anything to do with it. I'm urging the advisory committee to vote no on the amendment article, no on the Levy amendment, and yes to the Gladstone-Burstein replacement motion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Arno Amzalag. Ready?
Hello. Our names are Arno Amzalag and Sophie Schnapper, Jewish and Israeli parents of 4 in Brookline. We would like to speak in favor of the petitioner's new version of Warrant Article 19. Today, the question is no more whether the call for bilateral ceasefire should be discussed in Brookline. It is discussed, and that's why this subcommittee exists. The question is what you will recommend about bilateral ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and release of the hostages. All the member organizations of the Progressive Israel Network, including My Jewish Summer Camp, are Zionist organizations. Here is what they say. We represent the vast majority of liberal American Jews, and we support a bilateral ceasefire. There is no military solution. What they say is very close or identical to this resolution, this amendment. So what will you support? Additionally, things are going to get much worse in Gaza. This is the title of an article by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz on April 6th. The daily caloric intake in Gaza is below the minimum during the worst days of the Somali famine. Quote from WHO. The danger of starvation threatened more than 2 million people in Gaza, but the first victims are the toddlers, the less than 5 years old, 70%, 70, of whom have had diarrhea in the preceding 2 weeks. This is a trend 23-fold compared to 2022. It puts them at risk of dehydration, disease, and death. Will you recommend no action? While no one is safe in Gaza, not even the workers of World Central Kitchen, the flow of food and aid cannot be restored. Only a bilateral ceasefire can provide the aid to save these children's life and the return of the Israeli hostage safely to their homes.
Thank you very much.
Please don't sit on the sidelines. Thank you.
So via Zoom, I've got Karen Stenstrud. Yes, that's correct. I'm sorry. Apologies.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Mohammed, and I'm a Brookline resident. I'm originally from Iraq. I have lived through multiple wars and airstrike. Anyone who has lived through a war will tell you that they wouldn't wish it on anybody else. Some say, but Hamas started it on October 7 by killing 1,200 Israelis. And others say, well, Israel started it before October 7 with killing of thousands of Palestinians. And the answer to both is no. The massacres Israel did before October 7 does not justify October 7. The massacre Hamas did on October 7 does not justify what's happening right now. Gaza Strip is 140 square miles, which is equivalent to a circle of a 6.5-mile radius. So where we're standing right now, it will be Brookline, Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Watertown, and Newton till about the 95. Now put a wall, a 20-foot wall, starve them, bomb them every single day for 6 months. This is what it feels like. The total number of kids killed by Israel has exceeded 13,750 according to the UN, which is 750 more than what the article says. Imagine seeing the dead bodies of 750 children lined up. Actually, you don't have to imagine. You can just go to social media or YouTube and watch the videos of them. The number of children killed by Israel is equivalent to all the students in every single Brookline public school, Cambridge public school, and Watertown public school combined. And you're asking for more by not demanding a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire. I just ask you when you go home tonight to look at yourself in the mirror and decide which side of history and which side of the moral spectrum you would like to be on. Thank you very much.
Now it's Karen Stensrud. She was having some trouble logging in. Do we know if she got it? Yep. Okay. Great. I think you're still muted, Karen.
Oh, hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Stensrud. I'm a Brookline resident in precinct 16. And I too would like to just express gratitude for the petitioners, and I'm commenting in support of the amended warrant article 19. I definitely am heartened by all of the comments and concur with the articulate, astute, and heartfelt statements in favor of warrant article 19. On Easter Sunday, my daughter, a 10th grader at Brookline High School, and I had the honor and privilege of attending the Brookline Coalition for Peace hosted talk by Physicians for Human Rights Israel, where we were able to hear 2 Israeli physicians speak about their experiences in Gaza and the crisis therein. One comment that they stated was that they just go home every day feeling like they just didn't do enough. And what they did was affirm all of our humanity so far away from this crisis, feeling so helpless. That's what I fear slipping away is my humanity. And I feel heartened and grateful for the opportunity to go on record in stating and calling for a ceasefire now. I firmly believe that is what will bring the hostages home, and we need to care for the people of Gaza. You know, I can't, on my conscience, sit by and do nothing. I'm a proud Brookline resident and would be so heartened to know that we as a town have gone on record and recognize one another for our similar call for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Setting the list out ahead of time was a good idea.
Going down the list.
Hiba Osman, right?
Yes, thank you. I'm Hiba Osman. I'm a physician in Brookline, and I very much appreciate you taking the time to listen to this resolution and the arguments for it. I am in favor of the resolution that's being proposed, as well very much in favor of the Levy amendment, which actually spoke to me. I read before I came here, and that really touches on our shared humanity. It doesn't go into who started what. I have heard so much misinformation today that's really disturbing, especially by people who proposed other amendments. So if you do take them into consideration, I hope that you will go and research all the information that's shared with the other amendments about who did what. I'm thankful to hear that there were no beheaded babies mentioned, but there were lots of other pieces of atrocity propaganda that have been disproven time and again that have been raised. I think the reason you saw the room erupt when the misinformation about what sabaya means was because we all felt it. My mother would walk into the room and call me and my friend sabaya. I assure you she was not calling us prostitutes. It's Arabic for young lady. The misinformation is immense. And I have just a few more words to say in terms of why this applies locally. And it's not just the money that we spent, it's also that we as constituents in Massachusetts need to give our representatives a very strong message. Jake Auchincloss, who represents us, gets a lot of money from AIPAC, from the Zionist lobby, $100,000 last year, $68,000 so far this year. He is speaking based on the money that buys him. He needs to hear his constituents stand up for what's right, stand up for humanity, not point fingers at anybody, but do what's right. We need to speak up as
Thank you.
Brookline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mona? Are you Mona?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Mona Muafi, and I've been a Brookline resident for 14 years. Our family has loved living in Brookline and has always felt safe, welcome, and happy in our town. I want to start by addressing the Gladstone-Burstein amendment, which essentially calls for following the Biden administration's lead in this war. I stand against this amendment on basic principles of democracy. Democracy calls for citizens to stand up and be engaged in their government. It is not citizens who should blindly follow or lead any elected official, but rather elected officials that must listen to their citizenry and understand where they stand. In this moment, on this issue of grave importance, it is our duty as citizens to be here, to think critically, to engage on the issues, and to make clear where we stand. Beyond that, on the substance, the Biden administration has called for an immediate ceasefire. So I would say that the Gladstone-Burstein amendment should not be considered, neither on principle nor on substance. More than ever, this moment calls for standing together here in Brookline. This is not just our calling, but also that of Palestinians and Israelis working toward a shared future. Back in November, leaders from the New Israel Fund spoke to packed audiences at Temple Sinai and the Brookline Public Library, sharing their hope for a shared future. They urged us as Americans to not be divided at this moment on this issue. Just last week, a delegation from Physicians for Human Rights Israel came right here to Brookline with the exact same message. They urged us, do not turn away and please call for ceasefire now. As a progressive town, Brookline has stood firmly on the right side of justice in so many conflicts. As residents of Brookline, we are proud of this history. This moment calls for no less courage. Let us be clear. Sitting out on the sidelines, voting no action on this warrant is not a decision to stay neutral. It is an active decision to stay complicit in the atrocities we have been funding for the last 6 months.
Thank you, Mona.
Thank you.
Sean? Hi.
Hi, my name is Sean Leckie, Precinct 7. I ask the advisory committee to move forward with the article. I'll speak specifically to the question of foreign policy versus local policy. Last fall, the town moderator who appoints the AC when advising against an article on this topic described those in Brookline calling for a ceasefire as terrorists. For those living in the cave, that means kill them. That's a local policy. The Brookline police sent a crystal knocking email out to parents suggesting that Brookline Muslims were listening to calls to violence from global jihad. It's a local policy. In contrast, the FBI and others correctly identified that anti-Semitic and Islamophobic incidents have overwhelmingly come from right-wing white supremacists, not Jews, not Muslims. We've seen men shot, women chased down the street, kids bullied in school, and racist graffiti. That's local policy. Opposition to the article includes virulently anti-Semitic claims that local Jews must back Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and support famine to prove our Jewishness. Genocide demands dehumanization. In order to dehumanize other people, we first have to dehumanize ourselves. That's a local policy. I ask the AC to allow the article to proceed, to vote for a ceasefire, to return all the hostages, to affirm life, and to ensure the safety and peace in mind of our local Jewish and Muslim residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Via Zoom, if she's available, Daphne Zohar.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for listening. I'm a Brookline resident and I care deeply about the suffering of all fellow humans and I wish the war would end. I'm speaking against Article 19. Those proposing Article 19 have good intentions. They care about social justice and they believe the misinformation that has been served to them by Hamas, including statistics about death that have been debunked yet are repeated by news outlets and in this room without fact checking or discernment. Let's assume that we choose to believe those lies. Ask yourselves, what is it about?
Excuse me.
Can you hear me?
Excuse me, Deb, please, in the audience, please. Okay, everyone has been really good tonight. Let's not go down a path of criticizing or disagreeing with things that you're hearing, because that's what we talked about at the beginning of this evening, not to do that. If you're going to persist in doing that, we'll ask you to leave. Thank you.
Should I continue?
Go ahead. Yes, please, Daphne.
So let's assume that we choose to believe those lies. Ask yourselves, what is it about this particular conflict that Brookline feels it needs to pass a resolution about? Why didn't the town of Brookline pass resolutions to end the slaughter of collectively hundreds of thousands of civilians in Syria, Ukraine, Sudan, Yemen, Nigeria, Somalia, and Myanmar? In order to understand this, you must understand that anti-Semitism morphs into whatever a culture most fears and hates. Lies against the Jewish people to dehumanize and justify violence against them are as old as time. It's happening today. It's happening in Brookline. The same people who would faint at the sound of the N or R or F word are happily calling for violence and death of Jews under the guise of anti-Zionism. This is terrifying to those of us who are descendants of Holocaust survivors. Zionism led to the establishment of a Jewish state in the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. There is no Zionist movement anymore. There's only the question of whether Israel should exist or whether you believe, like Hamas and other Iranian surrogates, that Israel should not defend itself against an enemy that cynically causes and celebrates its own civilian deaths. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Max there?
She's not here. Can I just say that she feels very much hate.
That's
hate
okay. Please,
against
no, we'll just move on to the next speaker.
Okay.
Thank you. Sarah Lieberger on Zoom. Not here? Okay, well, if she makes it, we'll come back to her. Khalid Ismail.
Good evening. So my name is Khalid Ismail. I'm a Brookline resident, a physician, and I'm here in support of the petitioner's amendment of Warrant Article 19. So I just want to briefly share a reflection I had after reading the amended article. I couldn't help wonder, who would say no to such a proposal? Who in good conscience would say no to stopping the killing of innocent people, women, children, and elderly? It was wrong on October 7th, and it was wrong every single day since. Who in good conscience would say no to setting free innocent hostages? War has not freed any hostages. Ceasefire did. Who in good conscience would say no to immediate, unrestricted aid to starving families, women, and children, eating grass and sand and drinking their own urine at times? And who would, in good conscience, would say no to stopping racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and all forms of hatred in our own town of Brookline? That's what this petitioner's amendment is calling for. And, someone just asked, why is this particular war so different? And I have two answers for you. One, we are funding this war. Every single person in this audience and in this town, it's our tax dollars. And two, we can stop this war. The US can absolutely has the power to end this war tomorrow and push for political solutions. The best way to get rid of Hamas is to provide Palestinians with a better, true alternative, a chance to truly live and prosper, a reason to want to live in peace with Israel. And for those who say this is an international matter, has nothing to do with Brookline, I would argue it is enormously impacting many residents in Brookline. Just look at the room and look at, the audience on Zoom. Not to mention the rise in hate incidents against Arabs, Palestinians, Israelis, and Jews here in Brookline. This is directly related to the ongoing war and started way before the Warrant article. Coming together in support of this amendment,
Thank you, Khalid.
upholding our humanity and respect to human life.
Thank you. Ahmed El Said on Zoom.
Hi, my name is Ahmed El-Sayed. I'm a resident of Brookline. Today, I'm speaking in favor of Article 19 and the proposed amendment by the original petitioners. I'm asking the town of Brookline to match what so many towns and cities across the nation have done and call for an immediate ceasefire. For the past 6 months, Israel has killed more than 33,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children. This isn't just another conflict somewhere far away. Unfortunately, we, as American taxpayers, are funding this genocide. Our federal government chooses to ignore the majority of Americans who are in favor of a ceasefire and is using our tax money to pay for bombs instead of funding our schools and infrastructure. There are more than 100 towns and cities across the United States that voted for a ceasefire. Actually, the whole world is asking for a ceasefire. The world has had enough watching kids dying every single day. We're asking for a ceasefire, the release of all the hostages. I wonder how would that be divisive to our town? I've heard folks saying that this is beyond Brookline jurisdiction, which I disagree. This would not be the first time the town of Brookline has had taken a stance on an international issue. Actually, as someone said earlier, this isn't just an international issue. Many in our community have personal ties to the Middle East. Others are already devastated by the atrocities of that genocide committed in Gaza. We need to stand together and find our common humanity. Please vote yes for Article 19 and prove that Brookline is for all. Thank you very much.
So the next person we're going to hear from is Sarah Lieberger. Did I skip her before, or she was not here?
She's
She had a heart, yeah, okay.
Hello. My name is Sarah Lieberger, not Julia, and I'm a Brookline resident from Precinct 1. I'll try to keep this as succinct as possible, but for now, I need to get this off my chest. I support the ceasefire resolution stated in Warrant Article 19 for the following reasons. It is currently estimated that more than 33,000 Palestinians have been killed, including over 13,800 children. Even before October 7th, Palestinians have horrendously suffered under the Israeli government's regime for the past 76 years. As an American Jew in favor of a ceasefire, I believe this will save countless lives. I also want to emphasize that advocating for a ceasefire is not anti-Semitic. Many Jewish values align with justice, and I strongly believe that urging our officials to enact an immediate and permanent ceasefire is incredibly necessary, both for Palestinians and Jews around the world. The US is largely responsible for supplying weapons to Israel, and the consequences have been beyond devastating. For this reason, although this may sound contradictory, a growing number of Jews, including myself, are standing on the right side of history and will not stop pushing our world leaders to save Palestine from the Israeli occupation. After 6 months of genocide, The situation couldn't be more dire and urgent, and I hope the entire town can stand on the right side of history. Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren Shear.
And I'm another Jew in favor of Warrant Article 19. I reject the premise that this article is too divisive, given the particularly vile harassment local activist friends and myself have been subjected to. Said division has been here the whole time. Having one's safety threatened and experiencing cognitive dissonance because your beliefs are called into question are two different things. The genocide in Gaza, recognized as such by the ICJ and every reputable human rights organization the world over, is funded with billions of our tax dollars. Trying to silence all objection to that is anti-democratic and morally obscene, and no debunked propaganda can change that. $139 million from Massachusetts alone goes to Israel every year instead of local needs, while our Palestinian neighbors, people whom my heart has grown from the privilege of knowing, grieve the loss of entire branches of their family tree. This is a local concern, and it is a moral imperative to address it. This resolution calls for a bilateral, complete ceasefire, affirming the humanity of all concerned, while refusing to omit the history that led us here. This resolution demands the unrestricted passage of aid to Gaza because there is no excuse for purposeful starvation. The only answer to this horror is a political solution, not continued lies and brutality, while silencing those who demand mere decency. If 14,000 children killed does not spur you to action, ask yourself how many more need to die before you are comfortable speaking against it. As my hero, Auschwitz survivor, and lifelong crusader for Palestinian rights, Hajo Meyer said, never again for anyone.
Thank you.
Marina Radueva.
Good evening. My name is Marina. I'm here in support of the amended warrant Article 19 because peace and justice matter. Today marks exactly 6 months since the beginning of a mass destruction of Gaza after October 7, in which no red lines have been respected, where even schools, hospitals, mosques, and churches have been targeted and destroyed. In 6 antagonizing months of pain and suffering, an average of 4 children have been killed every 60 minutes, 4 children per hour for 6 months. Gaza lies in ruins now, its residents facing death, if not from airstrikes, rockets, and bullets, for sure from man-made starvation and disease. The scale of destruction is horrifying. Veteran humanitarians say that the crisis and suffering in Gaza is unlike any other they have ever witnessed before. Last week, 7 aid workers of World Central Kitchen, including our fellow American, were killed in a targeted attack by IDF with the missiles provided and paid by our country with our tax money. Their only crime being distribution of meals to starving Palestinians. They are now added to the list of 196 aid workers killed till now. Let's make it clear, there is no path to peace through violence. The global community recognizes it. And now, finally, it seems like President Biden, calling for a ceasefire, recognizes it too. So let us here in Brookline stand together in the midst of this crisis and support what's morally right. Peace and justice is not a radical idea. So please vote yes on this critically important Warrant Article 19, which would hopefully become a step towards achieving the lasting peace for both nations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Isan Lecky.
Assalamu alaikum and shalom to all our community here on Zoom. Ladies and gentlemen and esteemed members of the Advisory Committee, as Isan Lecky, a Moroccan-American immigrant and advocate for justice, it is an honor to stand before you to speak about a resolution that resonates deeply with my own life's mission. The proposed amendment to Article 19 for a ceasefire and humanitarian aid in Gaza is not just a political statement. It's a reflection of the values that have driven my journey from the streets of Morocco to the halls of the American democracy. In my life, I have witnessed and experienced the struggles that come from inequality and injustice. I have fought against the corporate greed that disregards the many for the profit of a few. Today, as we discuss this resolution, I see a parallel in our call for an immediate, enduring ceasefire and unrestricted passage of humanitarian aid in Gaza. This is not just a matter of policy, but a question of humanity. This resolution mourns the tragic loss of lives, calls for the safe return of hostages, and demands an end to the violence that breeds hatred and division. These issues echo my own struggles against racial, social, economic, and environmental injustices. In the face of adversity, we stand united, advocating for a world where peace is built on the bedrock of justice and empathy. Furthermore, the call for freedom, equality, and democratic representation for all in Palestine and Israel mirrors my belief in a just world, a world where every individual, irrespective of their background, can live with dignity and opportunity. This resolution is a step towards that world, and it demands our collective action and unwavering commitment. Thank you.
Rihanna Radweva.
My name is Rihanna Radeva, and I'm here today in support of amended Article 19. An immediate ceasefire has been supported by the vast majority of world states, the UN, and now President Biden. It's not just necessary, it's our moral obligation to ensure we support one as well. We see the horrifying images coming out of Gaza due to Israel's indiscriminate violent attack that pays no heed to its target, whether it's a child, aid or medical worker, hostage, or civilian. People missing limbs, orphans crying for parents that will never come back, parents grieving children they will never see grow. History will look back at us. Recent data shows that American young adults are becoming increasingly more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and the youth of today are the voters and policymakers of tomorrow. And although I come here today, slightly baffled, frankly, that we must debate whether to support such violence and terror or not, I can assure you we will not stop fighting for peace and justice. Because we as Americans will never support our money being used to kill while we watch fellow Americans struggle to make ends meet in our own home base. My little brother's elementary school alone just faced a budget cut that could have easily been covered by the money used to destroy the same elementary school in Gaza. We will not send hard-earned American tax dollars to aid Israel in murdering innocent people, innocent children, and now even our own countrymen who have been there to aid in humanitarian efforts. Let's uphold our moral duty to protect the innocent and fight for peace. Only a political solution will be able to secure this. Government leaders around the globe calling for a ceasefire know this. Thousands of Israelis rioting in Tel Aviv now know this. Millions protesting around the world now know this. And we in Brookline, eager to end violence in Gaza and divisiveness in our community, know this as well. Thank you.
Isabella Gaffour. Nope. Okay, if Isabella shows up, we will find a slot for her. Excuse me if I pronounce this incorrectly. Fazia Rashid, who should be on Zoom.
Hi there. Thank you.
Hi.
My name is Fazia Rashid, and I am in support of Warrant Article 19, and it's called for an immediate and lasting ceasefire in Gaza. I want to quote a letter from a network of 100 active duty military service members across the United States Armed Forces. The laws of war either apply to all of us or none of us. It is undeniably evident that the Israeli Defense Forces are repeatedly and systematically committing war crimes in Gaza. It has led these active military servicemen to assert that support for the conduct of the IDF is unacceptable and inconsistent with our values in the U.S. Armed Forces. It is incumbent upon us all to hold those we call our partners and allies to the same standards that we hold ourselves as Americans. We cannot defend the indefensible. We cannot abide by such a double standard, as there is no legal or moral gray area where service members of any nation target or kill civilians. When we, as Americans and citizens of Brookline, through our silence, allow this genocide to continue, we are saying that it is okay to kill our children, maim our civilians, and starve to death millions of our innocents. Please understand what you are really saying is that rules of war no longer matter, and that you are tacitly giving the world permission for these crimes to be committed against American civilians, American children, and American lives. Because rules of war apply to all of us or none of us. Please understand that this is the opposite of what our nations called for after the Holocaust. Thank you.
Alina Zilberberg.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having us here. I am a resident of Brookline since 1981. We came here as Jewish refugees from former Soviet Union, and Brookline became home for us, and it became a safe place for us. And I just can't imagine that we have to vote on these amendments. I think we should do no action because it doesn't bring us together. It brings us apart. And this is not what our town needs. This is a big international community. October, what happened in Israel 6 months ago was another Holocaust. And we're still trying to deal with this. And I'm talking on behalf of all my friends and neighbors who live in this town and who love this town and we always have I have a special place in my heart for Brookline, even when I complain about the weather. And I just look around the room and I hear people's reactions, and it's dividing us. Let's bring Brookline together. Let's have events together that bring us together. We have no power at all to vote on something that's happening in Israel or Palestine or Gaza, because they've been trying to negotiate peace and ceasefire and release of hostages for the past 6 months. Nothing. So how are we going to help? The only thing we can do is have a strong community here in Brookline where everybody is welcome. And that's why I would say no action. Also, I'm surprised to see there is an ongoing war in Ukraine. I am from Ukraine. I still have friends and family there. It's another place that's dear in my heart. Nothing is happening here. Why are we demonizing Israel? And its right to exist, which was given to us after the Holocaust. And this is why I hope that
Thank
we
you.
just
Thank you.
no action. Thank you.
Eilert Schultz. Eilert. On Zoom. Schultz. A-Y-L-I-T. Eilert.
Hello?
Yep.
Hi. There we go. All right. Ready to start. My name is Elite Schultz. I'm a Brookline resident, and I'm against all these Warrant articles. This is the wrong process. A 2-page Warrant article is the wrong vehicle for addressing complex foreign policy, and giving people 2 minutes each to have their voices heard leaves only enough time for sound bites and undermines the principles of thoughtful discourse and of truth. With all due respect, town representatives, you are the wrong people for this job, because you were not elected to do foreign policy. This is simply outside your lane. And if, despite all this, you feel you must go forward with a resolution on this topic, you must give people a real opportunity to address and debunk the dozens of lies put forth here tonight. You have asked us not to respond to what other people have said tonight, but just look at the gross distortions of fact. 33,000 civilians? I'm sorry, no. Half of them, if not more, were combatants. Indiscriminate bombing? Again, no. You cannot just throw out accusations like that with no backing. Just because you heard it on Al Jazeera does not make it true. The only time hostages were released was during a ceasefire? Again, simply not true. Hostages have been rescued on more than one occasion, and bodies, unfortunately, have been recovered too. Aid workers targeted? No, this was a mistake, a grave one, but not targeted. Calling it intentional is a blood libel. Collective punishment? A blood libel. Israel has genocidal intent? Again, blood libel. Jake Auchincloss gets a lot of money from AIPAC, implying that he does not vote his conscience or represent his constituents? Again, blood libel. And just because there are Jews saying these blood libels does not make them true. Again, town of Brookline should not be complicit. It is not representative of my voice. I would very much appreciate if you would make a clear statement that the town will be getting back to the work I elected you to do.
Thank you. So I'm just going to have to say something again. You know, I appreciate that people may not agree with what they're hearing. We talked about that at the beginning. It's just not right. It's not respectful. And it hasn't happened except for certain speakers. And I would really implore you to not do that. You know, we've been having a great night here, I think. And that is, it's just so disrespectful to the folks who are making comments. It's okay if you don't agree. Keep it to yourself. That's the compact that we agreed to, or maybe you didn't agree to it, but it's the compact I asked you to agree to tonight. Thank you. Ron Scharf. Not here? Okay.
That's
No,
John.
that's John Doggett, who's a member of the subcommittee. Avilis, did he get on? Great.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you, Avi Liss. I'm an attorney and a longtime resident of Brookline. In Brookline, I want to echo what the previous speaker said. While you are absolutely respected, and I appreciate all you do for this town, everybody. I've in fact sat on a panel like this for the town. This is just much bigger than what we all ask you and should ask of you. This is just something that is very heated. You can tell by the audience. You making a decision one way or the other is absolutely not going to make anything better. It's a soundbite, it's a news clipping, and it's a somewhat one-sided victory if this warrant article passes. And we do ask you to make no action on it, please. To reiterate a few other things, a lot of blood libel on one side, a lot of disrespect on one side, a lot of misinformation on one side. It is incredibly difficult as a Jew and as an Israeli and as an American to listen to the US bashing, the Israel bashing, and just basically non-factual statements. I would caution and really ask everyone on the board and panel and everyone in the room really, please look up the word genocide, just so you understand what that word means. Post 10/7, that word's been thrown around way too much, and it's just too much for us to handle. We are still healing from that. My grandparents survived the Holocaust. It's not something we take lightly. And I would also, echo the fact that we were silent as to matters in Congo, Syria, Ukraine, Yemen, Iraq, and Afghanistan that had far more people killed in a war. And we made no position on that. And just because we do happen to have a large percentage of Arab Americans
thank you.
and Israelis. Thank you.
Thank you. Marina Ichenko.
Hi, my name is Marina Shenko. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm a longtime resident of Brookline, and I also came here as a refugee from a former Soviet Union. And we obtained our refugee status because Soviet Union was considered a very anti-Semitic country. However, it was thinly veiled under the guise of anti-Zionism. So as such, I am extremely sensitive when people say that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is not the same thing, because from my life experience and from anybody who grew up in a Soviet Union, in fact, it is absolutely the same thing. As far as today's topic, I also call for no action. As a previous speaker said, there have been very large conflicts in the war where hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, starved, genocide, such as genocide in Darfur, and somehow it did not rise to the point of requiring resolution from town of Brookline. So the only difference I see from my perspective is that this particular conflict involves the only Jewish state in the world. And that is why we're talking about this. Now, I think that we should probably focus on improving our schools, improving our roads, maybe changing our wires so we can get electrified and maybe combat climate crisis versus putting ourselves in international politics. Thank you.
Thank you.
On Zoom, David Friedman.
Hi there. I had hoped to be with you in person, but unfortunately a family emergency led me to the ER. But I thought it was important enough to join you tonight because this issue is very important, obviously. And I'd urge you to not adopt a ceasefire resolution that has a lot of stuff that people probably might agree with. But at the end of the day, we all know that Brookline isn't going to change how President Biden or Senator Warren or Senator Markey see Hamas and Gaza in the crisis. They're well aware that a lot of people want a ceasefire. But I do think that this resolution is likely to stir up more anti-Semitism here in Brookline. You call for a bilateral ceasefire, and that suggests that we have to pressure Israel and Hamas. But actually, Israel has been willing to have a ceasefire for weeks. They've been willing to do a ceasefire in return for the hostages. So the problem is not Israel. And when you call that humanitarian crises, which is mainly caused by Hamas taking food from its own people, there's a false equivalency here too. And I'm just very concerned that it's not a coincidence you see more and more swastikas in Brookline classrooms, that you see anti-Semitic graffiti on T-stops in and around Brookline. This is happening today, and it's real, and it's very dangerous. So urge you to think about the anti-Semitism that's exploded and what will happen if there's more implication of anti-Semitism in a resolution which is just not based on facts. So appreciate your time on this. And as many other speakers have said, the town does not need to wade into foreign affairs and try to solve the Middle East crisis. Thank you.
Okay. Danielle Lenz.
The list is very long. Hello, everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Danielle. I'm from Precinct 11. I am Jewish. I am Israeli. I am actually pro a ceasefire, and yet I do urge you to vote no on the endorsement of Warrant 19 and the amendments. In my view, the question you should ask yourself today is not whether you think that the U.S. should change its involvement in the conflict, or whether this warrant is one-sided or sufficiently balanced. The question is what any endorsement that's related to this highly complex conflict would do to the community we are all in. The Biden administration doesn't care if Brookline, Massachusetts votes in favor of a ceasefire or not. But we, all the people that are here today, we do, clearly. That is exactly why this resolution is divisive, and it is why you shouldn't endorse it. Again, as I mentioned, I am actually in favor of a ceasefire, a true one that includes humanitarian aid with the return of all hostages and the termination of Hamas control over Gaza. But it doesn't matter because most people don't bother to read the original Warrant 19 or the amended version. I do acknowledge the great effort that was made to bring a warrant that is balanced. But we are living in the real world where such an endorsement is a call against Israel, and unfortunately not the current Israeli government or administration, but all Israelis. To think otherwise is simply naive. When a kid in my son's third grade year said that he's no longer allowed to play with Israelis, he didn't bother to check if the Israeli in question or his parents are Zionists or not, or whether they are against or not a ceasefire. And this is beyond disturbing. We should not be divisive and definitely not based on nationality. I therefore urge you not to endorse Warrant 19 or the amendments, not because you support or not its content, but because you understand the harm that it can do to our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adi Eldar Lise.
Thank you. I've been a Brookline resident for over 15 years, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about what I've been through over the past few weeks and few months. My 8th grader at Florida Ruffin Ridley came home from school last Wednesday, and she told me about a swastika one of her classmates drew in science class and showed it to another Jewish friend. Later that day, that very same day, my high schooler daughter came back from school and asked me if I had seen the graffiti, the anti-Semitic graffiti that was drawn on the Longwood T-stop. The amount of hate crime against Jewish and Israeli community has risen sharply over the past few months, and even more sharply over the past few weeks since Resolution 18 was actually proposed. This morning, you, the committee members, have sent an email saying that given the recent events in town, you're seeking police protection for this meeting. So I want to ask you this. If you decide to accept Article 19, what measure of precaution is the town willing to put in place to protect my children and all Jewish children in our community? I hope I don't hurt your feeling, but whether you would like to admit this or not, your decision today has merely PR implications. It is not likely that our US government or the Israeli government will pay attention to this decision. If you decide to accept Article 19 or its variation, the only implication your decision today will have is that it will likely exacerbate even further hate crimes toward the Jewish community in town. Are you prepared to take responsibility and accountability for the ramification?
Adi, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bonnie Bastian. She all right? I thought she was going to be here. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. My name is Bonnie Bastian, town meeting member in Precinct 5. Thank you for my time to speak here tonight. I'm here to support the petitioner's amendment to Warrant Article 19. I can't watch the horrors unfolding relentlessly and with impunity and not scream at the top of my lungs for this madness to stop at every opportunity available to me. We have every right in Brookline to demand this ceasefire because our hard-earned tax dollars are complicit in the bloodshed and are required to perpetuate a slaughter that guarantees another generation of young people on both sides are traumatized by violence. Over the past few weeks, it's become clear to me that efforts like this resolution across the country are beginning to work. Perspectives are beginning to change at the federal level and internationally. In this moment, peace feels like the farthest thing from possible, but falling into hopelessness is never an option. Rebecca Solnit wrote that hope is not the belief that everything was, is, or will be fine. The evidence is all around us of tremendous suffering and destruction. Hope doesn't mean denying these realities. Hope means facing them and addressing them by remembering what else the 21st century has brought, including the movements, the heroes, and the huge shifts in consciousness that have moved us forward towards a freer society. This resolution calls for a bilateral ceasefire and demands the return of all hostages, Israeli and Palestinian. It's hopeful, it affirms the value of all life, and it's an act of faith in humanity. Supporting this resolution and standing with the Brookline Peace Coalition is an effort to hold on to my own humanity. I hope that you will find your way to support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Rana Mumtaz.
Good evening. My name is Rana Mumtaz. I'm Precinct 15. Thank you for allowing me to speak here tonight. I'm here to support the Warrant Article 19 and the amendment filed by the petitioners, and I urge you to do the same. We are a town where compassionate, caring people flourish, irrespective of their ethnicity and religion. Seeing the devastation, carnage continue on a daily basis in Gaza brings me here to ask you for a permanent ceasefire. Brookline is an empathetic town that supports humane treatment towards others, regardless of race, ethnicity, and religion. If as residents of Brookline, we can care and feed an emaciated golden retriever who was found in our town on January 29th, why the hesitation to save innocent lives who are starving in Gaza and get the release of the innocent hostages? Humanity has to prevail. And Brookline can help send a message that leads the way. I urge you to support this resolution.
Thank you. Joshua Geller.
Hi, good evening. My name is Josh Geller, Precinct 7. I've come tonight to voice my vehement opposition to Warrant Article 19. Rather than pointing out the original resolution's numerous flaws, I urge the committee to carefully review the Gladstone written submission and Soyer-Shatz amendment, both of which do so remarkably well. I do wish to speak, however, about divisiveness, which results from the lack of humility and fidelity with regard to institutions. Regarding humility, critics of Israel commonly employ elusive legal terms of art belonging to international law, all of which carry implications of considerable severity. Sometimes it's white settler colonialism, other times it's apartheid or genocide or illegal occupation or illegal settlements in the West Bank. But we should have the humility to stop and ask if we really understand what we are saying. The original resolution and the Levy amendment precisely failed to do this. I implore the committee to consider that adopting a resolution, especially one that maligns Israel under the guise of international law, is detrimental to the welfare and cohesion of the community. Second, with regard to fidelity of institutions, we must ask, what is the role of Brookline Town Council? What function does adopting this non-binding resolution that forces no action and does not influence U.S. foreign policy play in the role of local government? It does nothing to solve any issue whatsoever affecting the residents of this town. If members of the community would like to talk about acting with impunity, look no further than the terrorist organization embedding itself within civilian population and stealing aid from its citizens. If you think we are funding Israeli atrocities, we also send hundreds of millions of dollars to UNRWA. What do you think has happened with that money? Maybe our tax dollars wouldn't need to go to Israel if we once we stopped funding Iran and its proxies who are unwaveringly dedicated to the destruction of Israel. Look no further than what you are doing here tonight if you would like to talk about wasting taxpayer dollars. In closing, I ask the committee to take no action with the resolution. If the committee chooses to adopt a resolution, I ask that it please consider the Gladstone-Burstein amendment as is the most neutral and least divisive, with the additional provision calling for the unconditional release of all hostages. Thank you.
Carlos Rios. Not here. Okay, next, Bradley Baskier.
The Gaza Health Ministry, controlled by Hamas, have said 33,000 people have been killed, but they don't distinguish between Hamas and true civilians. Israel says 13,000 Hamas terrorists have been killed. So let's take both numbers as fact, despite the fact that world statisticians have demonstrated that the ministry's death toll numbers are probably improbable and likely nonsense. Let's forget that and assume 20,000 civilians have died, 13,000 terrorists. That represents a 1.5 civilian to 1 combatant ratio, which is historically and unprecedentedly low, especially in urban warfare, when the average ratio of civilian to combatant deaths in urban warfare and wars is 9-1. What Israel is doing is distinct from genocide, because if it were, Israel would be trying to maximize casualties. However imperfectly, despite the world's unreasonable expectations, Israel is doing the opposite. So what is unique about this war? It's not the death toll. It's that you have an army in Hamas that has perfected the art of embedding itself with civilians so that you cannot hit them without hitting the people around them. Per a captured Islamic Jihad spokesperson released just today in a video, Hamas openly uses one X-ray room in Shifa Hospital next to an actually operational X-ray room. Other armies have done this, but none have perfected it to the extent that Hamas has. And I completely feel for the plight of the Palestinian people, but what creates this is the way Hamas fights. And either we can say one of two things. Either Israel doesn't have a clean shot and they have to let Hamas get away with it because it's just too much to bear. But then we are essentially creating a situation where terrorists have found the perfect solution whereby they can cross the border, slaughter, rape, behead, and then hide behind their own people and we can do nothing about it. It's a perfect strategy. Can we live in a world where we allow that to be an acceptable strategy? A ceasefire without the release of hostages and a full surrender by Hamas is a win for terrorists and barbarism. Vote no on the resolution.
Please. You don't like something that someone says, that's fine. Just keep it to yourself, okay? So just to give everyone an idea of where we are, we have 1, 2, 3, 6 speakers left. Okay, and then we can maybe have some discussion. Tanya Gorlin online. Ready when you are.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me speaking to you. I am against this resolution. I am a resident of Brookline for 37 years, and that is the first time I participate in this kind of discussion. I think that, first of all, I'm very much amazed that those who promoted this Article 19 didn't challenge the statistics and didn't check if the statistic provided by Hamas is right. There is an article by Professor Weiner, who is a leading professor of statistics and data science, at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. This article is named How the Gaza Ministry of Health Fakes Casualty Numbers. And I expect from intellectuals of Brookline to check the numbers. It is a respect to the residents of Brookline. As a town, we have never participated in international affairs, be it World War I, World War II, Korean, Vietnam War, Afghanistan War, Russian War against Ukraine, etc. But this time, Brookline is considering stopping Israel from finishing Hamas, a terrorist organization whose charter still has an article of destruction of Israel. Israel is doing great service to the whole world, sacrificing her own sons and daughters to make the world safer. What Brookline needs to concentrate on is...
Tanya, thank you. Your time is up.
Thank you very much.
Arshad Ahmed. Oh. Okay. Marwan Musa.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. My name is Marwan. I live across the street. I would like to invoke in the members of this town the golden rule to live and to wish upon others what we wish upon ourselves. I too doubted the numbers once of the amount of people that died. I too could not fathom back in January that our entire public school student population would have been decimated since October till January. But then I went and I looked for the numbers myself. Right now, nobody can really say 100% what are the numbers. But there is a pattern to history, which is that the numbers that are reported by the health ministry in Gaza are about 1 to 3% discrepant than those by the UN that go after each war and after each siege since 2007. The last being in 2019 with the Great March on the Wall, the last peaceful demonstration to free Gaza from the siege, where the UN report, take it or leave it, reported 150 civilians shot, including those who are on wheelchairs, shot by snipers in the head, while 500 meters away from the wall. So I ask you, if that happens one day,
Marwan,
someone else, that you take the time to say a ceasefire.
thank you. Marty Rosenthal. 2 minutes. You can do it.
Trying to unmute and open video.
Yep. You're all set, Marty. Tell us
All
when
right.
you go. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that. May I just ask a quick point of order? Did my written comments get into the record?
They were received and they will be public.
Okay.
Public,
All right,
yeah.
that, thank you very much. And I commend the chair for the way he's handled this meeting. I'll go very quickly. I really yield to nobody in doing resolutions on state and national issues, but this one I think was a huge mistake. I also understand why advisory may want to stay out of such issues, but on this one, I don't think you should. I think you should endorse Gladstone-Burstein as what I would call a Solomonic and very simple compromise. Secondly, just where I'm coming from, I believe Netanyahu and the West Bank settlements are horrendous. And I have to put that aside because what I think is the reason for Gladstone-Burstein, and I support the Charles Schumer approach and the Biden approach for 2 states. The problem is 3 800-pound gorillas that I can only mention very quickly about Warrant Article 19, and I don't question the good intentions of its proponents. Number one is the biggest issue that they ignore, and some of them don't agree with, is the right of Israel to exist as a state, as a Jewish state. Number two, that raises the question of self-defense against a genocidal terrorist organization that's committed to wiping out Israel as a Jewish state. And that brings up the question of self-defense and what is proportionate self-defense. And that's a very complicated issue under international law. Some have tried to simplify it today, saying Israel is violating international law. That's just simply not shown. And the fact that Hamas has human tunnels, and human shields and people embedded into hospitals, what is Israel supposed to do? Just have a temporary ceasefire, let Hamas rebuild, and let Hamas, which is committed to destroying Israel.
Marty, your time is up.
And let them continue to rebuild. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Hey, I'm going to try her again, Julia Lieberger.
Hi, I am a resident of Brookline and I'm Jewish. According to the 10 stages of genocide created by the founder and president of the organization Genocide Watch, the stages of genocide are as follows: classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, and denial. If anyone has cared to do their thorough research on Palestine and Israel's history and has paid attention to the events that have unfolded, leading to October 7th, you would clearly see that not only has the state of Israel carried out a genocide against the Palestinian people for the past 75 years, but is one of the most well-documented genocides in history. Israel carries out the classification stage by giving Palestinians and Israelis different license plates and passports that determine their freedom of movement and access to the land, and uses this classification to carry out the discrimination stage against Palestinians from participating in Israeli government and elections. Palestinians are often dehumanized by being referred to as human animals, which is perpetuated by the propaganda that is present in Israeli school systems and media. The state of Israel engages in the preparation stage by leading their citizens to believe in a "if we don't kill them, they will kill us" mindset, and constantly frames their aggressions on Gaza as self-defense. The state of Israel carries out the persecution stage by segregating Palestinians into separate territories that they cannot leave or enter, that they've left to starve in, and are deliberately deprived of needed resources. We are currently at the extermination stage of genocide, with tens of thousands of Gazans already dead and with casualties rapidly growing. If Brookline does not pass a resolution for a permanent and immediate ceasefire, the town is not only complicit in genocide, but is an active participant in one. As a Jewish resident of Brookline, I urge my local elected officials to do what it takes to spare people's lives who are dying in the masses from what is clearly a genocide, and vote to pass a ceasefire resolution. Thank you.
Our last speaker, Hajar Delshad.
Hello, thank you. My name is Hagar Dalshad, and I'm a resident of Brookline. I'm one of the very few Palestinians in Brookline. My father survived the Nakba, and I'm now living a life in which my tax dollars are going to kill potentially my own relatives. I hope that you can understand how difficult that is. I want to ask people in this room a message, a question. If you feel that this warrant article is so ineffective and so not helpful and so useless, why are you fighting it so hard? Why are you in this room?
Quiet.
I want to ask you, for the people who oppose a ceasefire, what do you think would be a number that's enough to stop the war? How many people is enough? Were 1,000 people enough? Were 5,000 people enough? Are 30,000 people enough? How many kids are enough? Would you like to pick how they're killed? Would you like them to be dismembered? Would you like them to be starved? Would you like them to be died after amputations have gone infected? What does it matter as we sit here and nitpick in our incredibly privileged positions? If this is genocide or genocide light, what does it matter? We're nitpicking while people die with our money. The people who wrote and championed this petition are facing harassment and doxing. There's no victory for them. They're not getting any type of political office or clout from doing this. They're doing this just on principle, and they're being attacked every day. So I'm going to come back and ask you to consider that what is dividing us is not this warrant article. What's dividing us is the war and the immoral way that it's being carried out. That is what's dividing us.
Thank you.
I'm not done yet.
Well, I'm sorry, you are done.
Okay, one quick.
I'm sorry.
I just want to
Wait,
ask you, what will
please,
you do when
please,
you face your children,
Hajar,
your grandchildren, and
please,
your
no,
Lord?
I'm sorry.
When
You do
they
not.
ask you, what did you do in this moment? Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to close the public hearing portion of this evening, and we're going to go to a public meeting. At public meetings, the public listens to the extent that the subcommittee has things to say. We do not take questions. We don't have a debate. This is really just deliberations for the subcommittee. I do want to just mention one thing. I've heard a lot about tonight, people commenting about the advisory committee, or, you know, you should vote for this. You shouldn't vote for that. You shouldn't be involved. The advisory committee is just what it says. It's an advisory group, and all it does is it listens to people who have put warrant articles on the warrant, and writes reports. Sometimes we make recommendations to town meeting. We do not tell town meeting what to do. More often than not, town meeting doesn't listen to what we have to say anyway. And I'm saying this for a couple of reasons. One is so that people appreciate our role here tonight, but also to make the point that the folks you really want to be talking to are your elected town meeting members in the precinct that you're in. And to the extent you want to make other statements to folks who actually will vote, those are the people who you should be writing to. So thank you. This subcommittee will make a presentation to the full advisory committee. I think that date currently is the 18th. Yeah, the 18th of April. That will be a public meeting. Again, there won't be discussion or debate. There may be an opportunity for each one of the petitioners or those who have put in proposed amendments to make some additional comments, but it's not going to be like this evening. Our role is to, think about what we heard tonight and write a report to our compatriots, make a presentation to them, talking about the pros and the cons of everything we've heard and what we've read and how we've analyzed things. And then what we say to them doesn't really matter either, because they may or may not listen to us, and they will have their own mind. The advisory committee has 30 people on it, so we're just a small part of that group. Having said that preamble, I'm going to open it up for comments or thoughts. And John is on Zoom, and he can be, I guess, unmuted and participate how he wants to. Who wants to go first? Ms. Murphy, please.
Thank you. At the risk of repeating what the chair has said, my name is Jocelyn Murphy. I am a town meeting member in Precinct 16 and obviously also a member of the advisory committee. But I think it's really important to amplify what the chair said about our role here. In local government, town meeting has been described as the purest form of democracy, and the non-discretionary law that mandates the inclusion of resident, petition, resolution, warrant articles does not distinguish between topics. The role of the subcommittee then is to conduct a hearing and report on this article to the full advisory committee, which in return will make a recommendation on the article and the amendments to town meeting. That recommendation could be no recommendation. The advisory committee's recommendation could also be for favorable action or for no action. The horror of the terrorist acts committed by Hamas in October and the ensuing anguish and fear that has been suffered every day since is beyond unimaginable. However, it is because of conversations like this that I can now fully appreciate what adopting this resolution means to the petitioners, to the proponents of the amendments, and to those of you who have delivered written comments and spoken in favor or against the resolution tonight. Thank you for your participation. A number of local communities have adopted resolutions similar to this one. Although a predominant concern raised by many of you is that the article and the related debate will divide this community, I agree with the Cambridge City Councilor who said, this issue has already divided our community, regardless of whether the city council does anything, and sometimes airing those divisions in dialogue is necessary for reconciliation. Here in Brookline, we've already seen some work toward reconciliation, evidenced by the petitioners and the amendment proponents who have edited their submissions in response to comments from this community. A Medford City Councilor observed that while we know that this one resolution will not end the crisis, it is important for local government in general to speak out so members of our community who are feeling powerless and afraid for their families know that they are supported by their neighbors. As a member of the subcommittee, I will not support making a recommendation to the advisory committee in favor of or against Article 19 or any of the proposed amendments. However, I agree with the comments that were made by Cambridge and Medford City Councilors to the extent that they support and encourage ongoing dialogue in the community about the fears that the members of the Jewish and Muslim communities in Brookline and others are experiencing because of this crisis. This view is shared in comments that members of this community, our community, wrote in support of and in opposition to the article, including one member who wrote, instead of investing in symbolic gestures that may inadvertently create increased risk and harm to members of our community, I believe we should be seeking opportunities for constructive dialogue that bring us closer together and offer support to all of those who have been impacted. Another who wrote, pretending that there is no division by avoiding or attempting to silence the discussion does not bring peace or understanding. And finally, I offer the words of a city councilor in Somerville who said, whether you're opposed to this resolution, whether you're in support of it, or whether you wish that we weren't even taking it up, all of us are part of one community, and tomorrow we will all wake up as neighbors. Thank you.
Kelly, you don't have to talk. You don't have to say anything.
Sure, I'll speak up. So, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for coming here and speaking up, speaking out, for and against, but actually getting it out there in the air, having this conversation. Personally, as the one ethnic group in this sitting in front of you who's actually part of that group who's been enslaved on this soil, I have a lot of thoughts on this. Either way we vote on this, people don't want to vote on it or not, I support the resolution. I support the petitioners who wrote the resolution. I support the amendments. I support everybody who had part of this conversation. There is a process that we have that Cliff and everyone mentioned, and I'm going to be straight up with everyone here. I will be voting in favor of this resolution, one way or the other. Well, there's nothing, excuse me, there's nothing to gain by this other than peace and love in your neighbor, okay? Seen a lot in this town, 44 years old, 4 kids in the school system, grew up in the school system, and I cannot sit here and say that we cannot get along and that nothing should be done. We have to speak up. This is what we do in Brookline, like it or not. This is what I've known to love about our community. To me, the difference in this resolution, and some might not like this, but hey, this is what it is. It's a late hour, a lot's coming out. I feel personally, it is the petitioners. So Warrant Article 19 resolutions, articles in the past, something about Warrant Article 19s. They all come, okay? If you look back in the history of Warrant Article 19s, resolutions, okay? Just think about it, y'all, okay? It hasn't been that good. It's always been divisive. There's always been some, I'm gonna support this one way or the other. And I feel as a town, we all should support some sort of resolution, okay? For us to be silent is unacceptable. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
John, you want to say something?
Cliff, were you speaking to me?
Yes, I was asking if you.
I couldn't hear you. Thank you. John Doggett, also town meeting member, precinct 13, and on the advisory committee. Boy, we've covered a lot of ground tonight, and I really do appreciate all of the folks that wrote in. We tremendous amount of correspondence on the issue, and obviously the passion that everyone brought to the room tonight. In terms of what we have to do, our subcommittee here is to sift through all of this and try to make a recommendation for the advisory committee, who will then make their recommendation to town meeting. It's a complicated process. I just look back over time, the two decisions that were made that have some similarity in the sense that they were foreign policy issues. In 2013, we did Syria. The unilateral bombing of Syria was proposed at the time, or at least the resolution was against that. The bombing never happened, but in that situation, the advisory committee after a lot of discussion, did a no action on that one. The last one in 2022, we have the Cuba embargo resolution, which because the rules are changed for the advisory committee, where we could do a no recommendation, which up until then was not possible. That's what happened. A unanimous decision on Cuba by the advisory committee was to do a no recommendation. So there kind of runs the gamut on these foreign policy issues. This one, for my money, a no recommendation is not on the table, I don't believe. There is too much at stake, I think, and everybody's investment in this. And they would want to see some decide one way or the other, perhaps. And as hard as it is, I look at the amendments that have been offered to the Warrant Article 19 amended motion, which the amendment was a great improvement over the original wording, which is good to see. But I still find some significant flaws in it, which have been covered by others. And so I won't dwell on that. But I think that if I was to support, I'd like to vote for something here, something positive. And I think the Burstein amendment, Gladstone-Burstein amendment, offers that positive. I mean, it talks about, it's very simple, and I like the simplicity. It's not, you can't misinterpret it, I don't believe. The town of Brookline supports the Biden administration in its efforts to seek a peaceful resolution to the war in Gaza and secure a lasting peace. I mean, what's not to like there? I think that really encapsulates it all. So the simplicity of it and the directness I find appealing, and therefore I'd be more inclined to support that amendment than the other two, plus the original WA 19 as amended.
You don't have to say anything.
No, that's okay. I just noticed my microphone doesn't have a noise canceling thing on it. Anyway, it's fine. First, I do just want to say thank you to everyone. I have really a deep appreciation for all the speakers tonight and everybody that submitted written comments. Thank you for your energy around this. As we knew coming into tonight, this article and its many amendments have elicited a wide range of reactions from people. On this subcommittee, I think we've already heard that we have a diversity of opinion, of thoughts, opinions, and personal feelings about the articles and amendments. And I do believe that there are times when the advisory committee, acting as a body, cannot make a recommendation to town meeting. And I believe that the best course of action would be that, should this be moved at town meeting, is for each town meeting member individually to make the decision on how to vote. So therefore, John, I'm hoping that there will be no recommendation from the subcommittee. And I would not be voting for that. So thank you.
Been a long few weeks with this, let me tell you. I want to reiterate something I said at the beginning, which is to thank the petitioners and all those folks who have proposed amendments, and all the people who spoke tonight for making the process as complicated as it was, as easy as it could be. I really appreciate that. I know, I hope Lisa did too, because, we spent a lot of time on that. So I'm someone who's actually on record for a long period of time as it relates to the advisory committee and resolutions. I view the advisory committee as being the town's finance committee, and that where we can add the most value and truly add value is where there are economic issues that we can analyze and actually provide value in terms of what the work that we produce. And that there are other situations where what it really comes down to is one person's opinion versus another. And that the opinions of the people on the advisory committee, individually or collectively, are no better than anyone else's in the room. And that it's a little presumptuous, frankly, for us as a group to basically tell town meeting how they should vote on what become matters of conscience or matters of, opinion that really have nothing to do with how the town operates, how the town's budgets work, what we're doing with the laws of the town that impact people on a day-to-day basis. And over the years, I participated in a number of different committees here in town, and I've pressed that view at every opportunity. And so I would join with Jocelyn and Kelly this evening in a process that has us talk to our colleagues about what we heard tonight, the pros and the cons of each different article or proposed amendment, and recognizing that those pros and cons themselves become opinions and views on information that is provided to us by third parties. And very few of us, I'm not saying none of us, maybe none of us on the advisory committee, but very few people in town actually have hands-on knowledge or hands-on experience or hands-on data that they can rely on. We're all relying on third-party information. But we would take that process and talk to our colleagues and then, see what our colleagues say. Now, I am no longer a town meeting member, so, I'm sort of don't have any say when it comes to town meeting at all. A number of the folks on advisory are town meeting members, and they may have a different view than the subcommittee would on that issue. I'm the only one of us five who is not a town meeting member. But that is how I would vote this evening. And having said that, the process for how we go about deciding what we might say to our colleagues is for, and I'm not sure how it would work in this situation. I guess it would be a vote on 19 as offered by the petitioners. And then do we take each amendment as a substitution and vote those amendments? Or do we?
Cliff, may I
please
interrupt? Sorry. I think we should treat it like we normally would, and that is deal with each of the amendments first as being replacing by replacing the motion, and if they succeed, then the amendment becomes the main motion and we vote on the main motion. But if there's a separate issue about no recommendation, which is outside of that, it sounds to me like that might go first, because if that's the dominant experience, then that settles it. It's a bit like referral.
All right. So why don't we do that? Because then, why don't we do that? So I'm going to make a motion for no recommendation from the subcommittee. And we can vote on that. And if that passes, that's great. If it doesn't pass, then we'll go through each proposed, the article and each proposed amendment in the process.
Before we proceed with the vote, I have a question.
Please.
So as a subcommittee, it is
I believe, within our purview to provide a report rather than a recommendation, which is distinctly different from no recommendation. And I'm wondering, John, if you understand how we could come to a conclusion to write a report, which is, again, distinctly different from no recommendation.
Is it though? I mean, my view of it is, we've heard from so many people here who feel so very strongly about these issues. I think we can represent that in the report. And by the way, we always provide a copy of the video for members. I'm not sure that they would watch it. A YouTube video as well. So, but some of them certainly would watch the entire video and read all of the comments that all of us have read that we've received.
One other point on that is that most people came to the lectern had written comments. And I would strongly recommend, in fact, I would ask that everyone forward their written comments to us, because then that can go in a packet and it actually would be easier for people to read than for them to watch 2 hours of presentations. So, yeah. And I will send that notice to all the speakers. I'll do a group email so that everyone has that advice.
But I'd like to repeat what you said about reaching out to your town meeting members. I mean, I'm a town meeting member in precinct 16. I listen to the folks that live in my precinct and I vote accordingly. So, and I trust that the other town meeting members do as well. So they are your elected representatives as well as the select board. So I highly encourage you to reach out to the select board and to your town meeting members with your opinions on this.
I think that we can write a report, and at the end of that, basically say, here's what we heard, here are the pluses and minuses, and here are people's thoughts, and here's our conclusion. We're not going to tell you what to do.
And my concern was just coming forward with a recommendation of no recommendation rather than leaving it just to a report. That is all. I was just.
Someone's going to ask us.
Okay.
Someone's going to say, well, so what is it?
Right, yeah.
And again, the full advisory does not have to listen to us.
That is very true. That is very true. No. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I've made that motion. Does anyone want to second it?
Second.
Okay. So, Jocelyn,
On no recommendation, yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Danelle,
No.
John,
I'm going to abstain.
the chair votes yes. So that is a 3-to-1 vote, and that will be the recommendation that we give to full advisory with our report. And I'm going to need some volunteers to help writing the report because that will be a challenging report. So,
Cliff, just a note that when we did no recommendation before, we didn't write a report.
well, so I will push back on that because the first time a subcommittee proposed no recommendation to advisory committee was the school subcommittee on the Florida Rufflin Ridley renaming. Because that was a very contentious renaming and there were 3 or 4 different alternatives. We listened to them all, we wrote a report and then we said, no recommendation. So I think it can be done.
It can be done, yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
I want to thank everyone very, very much for expressing their views tonight. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn. So moved.
So moved.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.